Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Martin McNeil. Michelle Marie Summers, a well-beauty queen and part-time model from California. She had always cherished two things, her family and God. At 21, she met Martin, a 22-year-old man, at an event for Mormon singles. Michelle believed he was the man of her dreams, but her parents did not agree with that. They disapproved of his bold, abrasive personality and felt uneasy around him, wishing that their beloved daughter would not date him. Like Romeo and Juliet, her parents' disapproval only made Michelle find her relationship with Martin more attractive. While her parents saw Martin as a narcissist, she believed he was an ambitious man who had overcome a difficult childhood. When he threatened to end his life if she left him, she agreed to marry him. Then, they eloped and secretly wed in 1978. Their honeymoon was short-lived. Within 6 months of their marriage, Martin was sent to prison, leaving Michelle to spend most of her time alone. Before meeting her, he had forged checks totaling $35,000. In addition to typical items like jewelry and clothing, he bought a grandfather clock, 60 pairs of socks, a refrigerator, and strangest of all, he bought enough chocolate-covered cherries to last a year. He got the idea for check forgery from a TV program about check fraud, which claimed it could be done in 60 minutes. Martin thought he could do it even faster. Sadly, forging checks was just one of Martin's many lies. He almost completely made up the story of his life. He had ambitious plans for his future, despite a difficult childhood. While many young men pick up the guitar to join rock bands and impress women, he chose a different route. He aimed to gain wealth and recognition by becoming a doctor. However, his poor academic record posed an obstacle to his dreams. Undeterred, Martin applied his usual tactic, which was to lie. He first used a fake certificate to enroll in a medical college in Mexico. After studying there for 6 months, he forged more certificates and was accepted into a medical university in California. His plan worked, and in 1984, he officially became a doctor. By that time, he had also taken note of the many attractive women among his patients. Later, when Martin realized the respect people had for lawyers, he decided he wanted a law degree as well. Once again, he pursued this goal dishonestly. While working at the Brigham Young University Clinic, he falsified his application to gain admission to the university's law school. He has been a chiropractor for many years, but if his fake qualifications are exposed, he would have faced severe criminal charges. In 1990, he was caught committing fraud and was banned from writing medical bills for 12 years. In 1998, Martin was expelled from the medical center following allegations of sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior, and incompetence as a doctor. However, this did not deter him. In 2000, the governor of Utah appointed he as the chief physician at the Utah State Development Center. On the surface, he appeared composed and normal, but a closer look revealed otherwise. For example, he frequently threatened to end his life. However, whenever someone criticized his actions, he used this threat. In 1994, after being discovered having an affair with one of his patients, Martin threatened to end his own life. In 2000, after his wife, Michelle, discovered he was watching pornography, he threatened to kill her with a meat cleaver. His 14-year-old son had to intervene and take the knife away. 5 years later, he was caught again watching explicit films and once again threatened to end his life. It was also revealed that Martin had multiple relationships with women across the country. 2 of these women, Anna Osborne and Gypsy Willis, were more than just casual lovers. Anna owned a laser appeal clinic and met Martin in 2005 while he was working as a consultant. At the time, Anna was facing a difficult divorce, and Martin offered to act as a mediator between her and her husband. The reason is that he has specialized training in the field of lawyers. After that, Martin and Anna's relationship quickly became intimate. In conversations, he often bragged that with just the right combination of drugs, he could kill people easily, making death look natural, like a heart attack. He even suggested to Anna that she should kill her husband, but she initially thought that he was only joking. As for Gypsy Willis, she is Martin's true love. They met online in November 2005. Martin presented himself as a doctor and lawyer, he impressing she with his intelligence and charm. At the time, Gypsy was a 29-year-old nursing student. He gradually realized that without she, his life would not be perfect. Until then, he thought he had successfully balanced his double life, keeping his affair hidden from both sides. But he was mistaken. In February 2007, Michelle grew suspicious. She noticed Martin behaving oddly and decided to check his phone records. She repeatedly saw Gypsy's name and number. So she confronted him about the affair. He admitted to it and promised to end the relationship with Gypsy on one condition: Michelle had to work on herself, specifically her appearance. He asked her to have a facelift. At first, she was hesitant. She felt she needed to prepare for the surgery, as she had high blood pressure and wanted to address that first. However, he reassured her that everything would be fine. Reluctantly, she agreed, hoping the facelift might improve their marriage. Then, they met the surgeon, who would perform the surgery. Just moments before Michelle was put under anesthesia, Martin pulled the doctor aside and handed him a detailed list of medications to prescribe. He assured the doctor that he would personally oversee Michelle's recovery. Trusting Martin's medical expertise, the surgeon agreed without any hesitation. The operation was a success, and the doctor prescribed the medications as Martin had requested. However, these medications were dangerous when combined. The doctor assuming Martin would manage them properly, so he has no reason to worry. On April 3, 2007, Martin brought Michelle home from the hospital. She was heavily sedated, her eye was bandaged, and Martin took care of her. Their eldest daughter, 22-year-old Alexis McNeil, was studying to become a doctor, following in her father's footsteps. On April 10, 2007, she returned home for the holidays and to care for her mother, Michelle, who was recovering from surgery. She immediately noticed that her mother looked unwell and wanted to help. But Martin refused to let her. He asked Alexis to leave the bedroom, insisting that he would take care of Michelle himself. The next morning, Alexis found her mother in a state of exhaustion, lethargic like a zombie. She confronted her father, Martin, and he admitted he might have given Michelle too many pills. He explained that Michelle had vomited, so he gave her additional doses. Shocked that her father, a doctor, was mishandling her mother's medication, she insisted on taking over the responsibility of administering the pills. In private, Michelle confided in Alexis, asking to touch each pill before taking it. With her vision obscured by bandages, she relied on the unique markings on the pills to identify them. Michelle revealed she didn't trust Martin, believing he was up to something sinister. She even pulled Alexis close and said that if anything happened to her, Martin will be the one to take responsibility. Michelle recovered quickly, allowing Alexis to rest and continue her studies in medical school. The last time she spoke to Michelle on the phone was at 8:45 a.m. on April 11, 2007. When Alexis asked Michelle how she felt about Martin, Michelle responded happily, saying he was sweet and loving. She reassured Alexis there was nothing to worry about. However, Alexis unable to shake a sense of foreboding that something was wrong. During the morning of April 11, 2007, Martin left for work as usual. He then picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school at around 11:35 a.m. When they got home, he told Ada to go find her mother, Michelle, while he started preparing dinner in the kitchen. Little girl ran through the house calling out for her mom, but received no response. Eventually, she checked their bedroom, but her mother wasn't there. Thinking her mom might be taking a bath, little girl headed to the bathroom. She stumbled upon a horrifying scene that would haunt her forever. She found her mother, fully clothed, lying face down in the bathtub. The water had turned a reddish-brown color. Shocked and terrified, she screamed and called for her father, Martin. When he arrived, he told Ada to go get help from a neighbor, while he worked to get Michelle out of the tub. Then, Martin made a series of calls to 911. Some calls were abruptly disconnected, while in others, he claimed to be a doctor performing CPR on his wife, only to hang up again. These unusual behaviors prompted the 911 dispatcher to keep recordings. Shortly after the discovery of Michelle's body, Martin's son Damien and Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, arrived at the house. Martin speculated that Michelle might have overdosed on medication and passed out in the tub. However, instead of checking the medication himself, he insisted that Eileen flush the pills down the toilet and dispose of the packaging. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. On the afternoon of April 11, 2007, Alexis received a strange message from her father, Martin. He mentioned that Michelle wasn't getting out of bed and asked Alexis to call her. When Alexis tried, Martin answered and said that Michelle was now in the bathroom, not breathing, and that he had called an ambulance. He then hung up abruptly, without waiting for her reaction. Alexis, one of the last people to learn about her mother's passing, hurried to Utah. She was deeply saddened by her mother's sudden passing, and she suspected that her father might be responsible. Her first reaction was to check how much medicine her mother had left, as she knew how many pills her mother had taken and how many should remain. However, Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, had thrown the pills away before she could check. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. However, Alexis suspects that her father, Martin, is responsible for her mother's death. She confided everything to her older sister, Rachel, but no one wanted to believe that their father could harm their mother. Martin enjoyed taking risks and pushing boundaries. However, when he told his daughters to go to church and pray for God to send them a new nanny to care for the younger children, he crossed a line. Their mother had been buried only 3 days earlier, but the daughters obeyed their father and went to meet the nanny. The woman introduced herself, and Martin acted as though he was meeting her for the first time. In truth, he knew her very well. She was his mistress, Gypsy. She introduced herself as Jillian, but Alexis immediately recognized her as Gypsy Willis. Alexis warned her father, Martin, not to bring Gypsy into their home, but he ignored her. Less than a month after Michelle's funeral, Gypsy moved in with he. She didn't behave like a nanny at all. She didn't care for the children, clean, cook, or do any household tasks. Instead, she spent every night in Martin's bed. Rachel and Alexis questioned their father, Martin, demanding to know why this so-called nanny wasn't doing her job. However, he threatened to kick them out of the house if they didn't treat Gypsy well. With the help of their aunt, Michelle's sister, Rachel and Alexis cooperated with the police to investigate their mother's death. Meanwhile, Martin was scheming again. Gypsy is in debt, and Martin came up with a plan to solve it. He told her that creditors wouldn't be able to find her if she changed her identity, and he found a way to make it happen. Martin adopted a 16-year-old girl named Giselle, then sent her back to her biological family in Ukraine so Gypsy could steal her name and social security number. Then, he told Giselle that he would adopt her in the summer, but she never heard from him again. When Martin returned to Utah, he found a new home for his 3 other adopted daughters. A year later, Giselle's cousin, Gil, visited to check on her well-being. Upon arriving, Gil discovered that Giselle was living in extreme poverty with her biological family. Meanwhile, in the United States, Gypsy was living a comfortable life under Giselle's identity. Martin even altered his will, leaving everything to Gypsy. At times, he referred to Gypsy as his wife, while at other times, he claimed she was his daughter. When Gil brought the real Giselle back from Ukraine, Martin and Gypsy's fraudulent scheme involving fake documents was immediately exposed. In 2009, both pleaded guilty to federal charges and served time in separate prisons. While he was incarcerated, Rachel and Alexis tried to produce evidence of his involvement in the death of their mother, Michelle. The chief medical examiner agreed to review Michelle's toxicology report. Although each drug in her body is not toxic when taken individually, their combination can lead to death. The examiner also concluded that Michelle could not have taken the drugs on her own. As Rachel and Alexis investigated further, they uncovered the extent of Martin's lies. They discovered that his entire career was built on forged credentials. Adding to the scandal, Martin was still collecting disability payments from a brief stint in the military. Martin completed his prison sentence for fraud, forgery, and identity theft in July 2012. Perhaps he had plans to change himself, maybe become an astronaut, a nuclear physicist, or whatever his imagination could come up with. But he never got the chance. In August 2012, he was officially charged with the murder of Michelle. Tragically, Damien, one of Michelle's children, wasn't there to support Rachel and Alexis during this time. A few years after Michelle's death ended his life. Rachel and Alexis testified against their father, Martin, thereby exposing all of his lies and fraud. It also came to light that he had begun sexually assaulting Alexis just 6 weeks after Michelle's murder. He was convicted of this assault in a separate trial. Years after Michelle's death, her family finally uncovered the truth they had been seeking. Martin had drugged Michelle with substances that were nearly undetectable, then left for work to establish his alibi. In 2013, Martin McNeil was found guilty of murder and sentenced. As for Gypsy, she was only charged with identity theft and has maintained a low profile since the trial. Michelle and Martin's daughters are determined to completely eliminate their father's negative influence and figure from their lives. Alexis got married and adopted her 3 younger sisters. She also changed her last name from McNeil to Summers, her mother's maiden name. Alexis explained that she didn't want to be Dr. McNeil. She wanted nothing to do with her father. Hey detectives. Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Celia Barquin. Celia Barquin was born on July 6, 1996, in Point San Miguel, a village in Cantabria, northern Spain, where her family has lived for 8 generations. She then moved to Iowa on an athletic golf scholarship. Many universities offered her scholarships due to her talent, but she chose Ames, Iowa. With a population of 65,000, Ames was quiet and cozy, reminding her of her hometown in Spain. However, at that time, she did not expect that this decision would be a serious mistake. Celia has a wonderful relationship with her family, who remained in her homeland. Her parents, Maria Rosa and Marcos Barquin, had 2 children, Celia and Andres. Marcos worked as a butcher, and Maria was a saleswoman at a clothing store. However, after their children were born, Maria became a housewife, focusing on raising the children and managing household tasks. The family was not wealthy, they lived modestly but were close-knit and supportive. Their children are their top priority, and their parents did everything to ensure that their children receive a good education and started their lives on the right path. Andres pursued a law degree, while Celia, a talented golfer, earned a scholarship to study in the United States. Celia's mother, who loved golf since childhood, passed on her passion for the sport to Celia. Being smaller than other girls her age, Celia learned to use specific techniques to win. When growing up, her petite figure enabled her to practice continuously to improve her abilities. Her dream was to become a successful professional golfer, not for fame, but to support her parents. Celia often expressed her desire to buy them a house and take care of them. To achieve this, she practiced diligently to improve her skills. Celia has achieved numerous titles and awards for her victories in various competitions. She won the European Women's Amateur Championship in Slovenia in June 2018, placed second in the women's team golf competition in Europe. Was the 2018 Big 12 Women's Golf Champion in the United States, and was named the 2018 Iowa State Athlete of the Year. There were high expectations for her, and many believed she had a bright future. When Celia moved to the United States, her relationship with her family remained strong. She talked to her parents daily, sometimes even 4 or 5 times a day when she had free time. Celia missed her family a lot. A nightly call to say goodnight and share the day's successes was a cherished routine. During vacations, she visited her family in Spain. Even while on vacation, she continued to train hard to improve her skills. Her mother supported her passion and often trained with her. Celia was comfortably settled in Iowa, living with her boyfriend, Carlos Nigri Nabalis, in a rented apartment. When Celia and Carlos met at the university, she was dating someone else, but Carlos fell in love with her at first sight. Her charming smile, piercing gaze, cheerfulness, and kindness captured his heart. And her determination and perseverance earned his deep respect. Although Carlos had to accept that she was with someone else, but he became her best friend and consistently supported her. For over a year, he stood by her side, then she became disillusioned with her boyfriend and broke up with him. After another walk together, Carlos finally confessed his feelings, and Celia pulled him by the shirt, kissed him, and without saying a word, left in a car. He was so happy she felt the same way that he ran around his room shouting with joy. That's how their romance started. To celebrate the beginning of their relationship, Carlos even set off fireworks to impress her and sent her a video where he told her she was amazing and one in a million. From then on, they were inseparable, and over time, they moved in together and started living together. Lately, their conversations were filled with dreams about their wedding venue and even the names of their future children. They were already engaged and planning the most important event of their lives for May 2017. Carlos had graduated from college and secured a job at an engineering firm in Ames. Celia was in her final semester at Iowa State University, also majoring in civil engineering. After completing her athletic career, she aspired to become an engineer and make a positive impact on people, wanting to demonstrate that women can succeed in construction as well. Celia excelled in her studies and successfully showed that women can thrive in this field. Celia had many friends and enjoyed surprising them with delicious Spanish dishes that she cooked very well. Among the university students, a popular video showed her skillfully tossing a Spanish omelet, flipping it in the air, and adding butter to make it burst like a fireball. Her friends loved this performance and often asked her to repeat it. In the summer of 2018, Celia spent her time in Spain with her family before returning to Iowa to graduate. She was a promising athlete on the Iowa State women's golf team and also competed individually. She was preparing for an upcoming competition. But unfortunately, those plans did not materialize. Celia's assassin has been following her and he has also planned an attack. On the ill-fated day of September 17, 2018, Celia arrived at the golf club after finishing a conversation with her mother. The staff, familiar with she, informed her that a group of 15 older men from Des Moines would also be playing golf. At 8:45, the group was sent to the starting line near the first 4 holes. Celia watched them arrive in golf carts and start playing. The retirees invited her to go ahead and start her game. Celia pushed the golf club to the first hole and then moved to the 4th hole to avoid delaying the older men. The seniors described her as polite and friendly. She then proceeded to the 7th hole, which was unpopular due to its distance from the other holes and its location next to Squaw Creek Park, known for dense vegetation. Athletes often avoided this area because it was sometimes frequented by unauthorized park visitors and aggressive homeless people. However, Celia was not familiar with this club and unaware of its thing, so she went there. To reach the 9th hole, players must cross a bridge along a wide path and then pass through a wooded area. One coach described this area as eerie, likening it to Sleepy Hollow. Celia went in that direction. Later, at around 10:30 a.m., a group of 15 people arrived in the area and found Celia's golf stick with her belongings, but Celia was not there. While the group played, they noticed that Celia hadn't appeared even after 10 minutes, which was unusual. Concerned, they decided to approach Celia's golf stick and look for her. Upon closer inspection, they found her t-shirt, baseball cap, and other items scattered on the ground, with her phone left. While it seemed some items might have accidentally fallen from her pocket, the presence of her t-shirt and the abandoned phone was puzzling. They searched the surrounding area but did not find anyone. Subsequently, they notified the club management to report this troubling discovery. The group reported seeing a young, blonde girl playing golf earlier, but now she was missing, and her belongings were left behind. The staff who arrived recognized her as Celia and began searching for her. In less than half an hour, they found a body floating in the pond near the 9th hole and called the police. Once the body was retrieved from the water, police identified her as Celia Barquin, the reigning European champion. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and torso. A search dog quickly picked up a scent and led officers to a tent in a wooded area of Squaw Creek Park. The tent was empty, but there was blood inside. The police suspected that a homeless man had been living there and might have attacked Celia, so they began searching for him. While the police were searching the area, a man approached them. He introduced himself as Colin Richards and mentioned that he lived nearby and was there to collect his tent. Colin, like Celia, was 22 years old, but they were complete opposites. The police suspected him of the murder because his face was covered in scratches. In a black backpack he carried, they discovered bloody clothes, a t-shirt and shorts, which he had replaced with clean ones. Search dogs also detected his scent. Additionally, he had a deep gash on his left arm, from which blood was oozing, and he attempted to conceal it from the officers. Based on this evidence, Colin Richards was taken into custody by the police. He was at a friend's house before the police arrived, according to Colin. 2 male acquaintances took him to the park to get his tent. When he went to retrieve it, he saw the police. He denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he had never met Celia. He said the scratches on his face were from branches he encountered while walking through the woods. Colin was known to the police for substance abuse, alcohol issues, and mental health problems. He became homeless after being released from prison 3 months before the murder. He had served about 7 months in jail for burglary and had multiple prior convictions for similar offenses, with many criminal records. Colin grew up in a dysfunctional family and was known to the police since his teenage years. Detectives interviewed 3 men who were acquaintances of his. One of these men shared a tent with Colin, while the other 2 gave him a ride from his home to the park. The homeowner allowed Colin to wash and change his clothes because he was dirty and covered in mud, blood, sand, and water. After cleaning up and changing his clothes, Colin left with his bloody clothes in a black backpack to return to the park for his tent. He intended to leave the area afterward. According to the men, Colin was acting unusual that day, extremely nervous, and very to leave. He didn't explain his sudden decision, only mentioning that he had cut himself badly and dirted his clothes. Another homeless man who lived with Colin in a tent at the park mentioned that he always carried a serrated knife, which he used for household tasks. A day before the murder, Colin confessed to this friend his desire to rape and kill someone. But that man thought he was just joking. Colin was charged with first-degree murder right after Celia's body was found. Investigators believed the crime was premeditated. They thought he had planned to kill someone and was looking for a she that day. The judge set bail at $5 million, but Colin, of course, didn't have that kind of money, so he remained in custody until his trial. Meanwhile, Celia's family in Spain had no idea about these tragic incidents, but they were very worried because she hadn't called them or answered their calls and messages. Police Ames tried to contact their colleagues in Point San Miguel and the embassy staff in Madrid to inform Celia's family about the terrible news, but it was already past midnight in Spain and no one was working. Therefore, Celia's coach had to call her parents to inform them of their daughter's incident. After many hours of not hearing from Celia, the parents learned that their daughter had been brutally murdered. Later, a serrated knife was discovered in a wooded area, bearing the fingerprints and DNA of Colin. Furthermore, the blood found under Celia's fingernails contained fragments of Colin's skin, confirming that these Colin scratches were caused by Celia, not by branches. Initially, he denied his guilt, but eventually, overwhelmed by the evidence, he confessed. He admitted to using substances that day and not thinking clearly. He saw a beautiful young woman alone in the woods and decided she would be the perfect target. Colin had never met or known Celia before, and she was an unintended victim of his violent outburst. Since the death penalty has been abolished in Iowa since 1965, he faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Colin's family attended the trial and shared details about his upbringing. His parents were never married or living together when he was born. For the first 10 years of his life, Colin lived with his father, who was strict with him. His father often sent him to bed alone while he went out to the bar. During this time, only Colin's grandparents looked after him. Later, his mother fought for custody and took Colin to live with her. By then, she had remarried and had 2 more children. They moved to the countryside, believing it was more peaceful. The family maintained strict discipline, and Colin's room was so tidy that they joked he should join the army. Colin was a diligent student, but as a teenager, he grew close to his alcoholic father and began having behavioral issues. His father attempted to discipline him, but Colin didn't listen, leading to his expulsion from the house at age 15. He fell in with a bad crowd, left school, and became addicted to alcohol and drugs. At 18, Colin had a girlfriend twice his age. In May 2015, he was arrested for domestic violence against her, found guilty, and sentenced to 60 days in jail. On another occasion, after being accused of shoplifting, he threatened to return and shoot up the place. Colin's life went out of control, but no one seemed to notice. After the domestic violence case, he was arrested multiple times over the next 2 years for theft, assault, harassment, and attempted burglary. Although he was sent to behavioral intervention courses, they didn't work. In November 2017, Colin was sentenced to 2 years at Mount Pleasant Correctional Facility for burglary in violating probation. Despite having disciplinary issues, including fights with other inmates, he was released on parole after just 7 months in June 2018 due to overcrowding in the prison. Only 3 months after his release, he killed Celia. After being released from prison, Colin was taken home by his mother and stepfather and lived with them. They had reconnected with him during his time in prison through letters. His parents trusted him and gave him an opportunity for a fresh start, believing his promise to avoid drugs and cut ties with bad influences. However, just 2 weeks later, they had to ask him to leave for breaking his promise. Colin then went to Ames, about an hour away from his home. He stayed briefly at the city's only homeless shelter, but there were not enough beds available. Seeking assistance from his mother, she bought him a tent. In his new city, the Ames Police Department soon noticed him. On June 29, he was arrested for public intoxication. On August 11, the police received a complaint from a Target store saying that Colin and another homeless man were camping on open land behind the store and were chased away. They then moved to camp in Squaw Creek Park to avoid bothering anyone. According to Colin, the police allowed them to camp there, but police representatives deny this, stating that camping overnight in the park is prohibited. On September 2, 15 days before Celia's murder, police were called to a Burger King where Colin threatened customers with a knife but was later released. On September 8, his mother and stepfather visited to celebrate Colin's 22nd birthday. They took him out for dinner and to a laundromat to wash his clothes. His mother was concerned about his behavior. Colin was quiet and distant, responding to their questions with only one-word answers. They dropped him off at a tent in the park where he was living with another homeless man and then drove home. It was then that Colin confessed to his friend that he wanted to rape and kill a woman. The next morning, Celia was found dead, but she had not been raped. According to the police, he probably didn't have time to commit the act. Colin's parents said it was his own fault. They tried to help him, but it didn't work. He still chose to side with evil. Therefore, on August 23, 2019, Colin Richards was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the Story County Jail in Nevada, Iowa. The whole town of Ames mourned Celia's death, with thousands attending a candlelight ceremony to honor she, the talented athlete. Celia's family was devastated by the news of her murder. They were furious that someone with no achievements or aspirations had cruelly taken the life of a talented and promising athlete with a bright future. Collins clearly had no regard for Celia's life. He randomly chose and killed her simply because he felt like it, believing she was an easy target. The Celia family was relieved by the verdict and grateful that the culprit was swiftly caught and could no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Now, he will remain imprisoned forever. Their only regret is allowing their daughter to go so far away, despite it being her dream. Statistically, the U.S. is not safe. The murder rate per capita in the U.S. is 26 times higher than in Spain. In their small town in Spain, there hasn't been a murder in 100 years. Celia's parents have kept her room just as she left it, with one addition: an engineering degree awarded posthumously by the state of Iowa. They often walk through the local golf club and remember when their daughter first started playing the sport there. The community in the small town of Ames, including the university administration and students, was outraged by the crime. The situation was particularly concerning because the golf course was next to a wooded area without any fencing. Due to the golf club's negligence, a girl's life was put in danger. This wasn't the first murder in the neighborhood. Back in 2008, a man was killed in a stabbing incident, and the homeless attacker was convicted of murder. After Celia's tragic death, her boyfriend Carlos found it too painful to stay in a town full of memories of her. He then moved to Florida. Celia's brother was greatly affected by her death, losing a lot of weight from stress. He decided to join the police force after earning a law degree, aiming to help others. This career choice was inspired by his sister, who encouraged him to find his purpose. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Anel Baez Alvarez. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Guamuchil, Sinaloa, Mexico. She was the second child of Ilda and Hugo, with an older brother named Omar. Later, the family welcomed a younger sister, Adriana. Initially, she was a shy child. She gradually became more confident, showing grace and charm. She was energetic and always tried to entertain those around her. Anel's father was a tailor, and the family was prosperous, close-knit, and happy. However, The family was no longer happy when Annel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The children had to grow up quickly to take care of her. After a tough battle with the illness, Ilda passed away in 2012. The family was devastated, but they didn't give up. They supported each other through the pain and trying to make life better. The tragedy brought the sisters, Adriana and Annel, so close that they shared everything, facing sadness and problems together. Annel remained a cheerful and friendly girl with a passion for dancing and music. As she entered high school, she became an ideal daughter, helping with household chores, caring for her younger sister, and keeping up her good grades. Cooking for the family became one of her favorite activities, especially making desserts, which became her specialty. Annel conquered her shyness and became one of the most popular girls at school. She also started a music group as a singer, where she developed a love for the ballad Amor Eterno. At the same time, Annel met someone who would become her best friend, at least for a while. Her name was Erandi Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable duo, earning the admiration of everyone around them and being considered the most popular girls in school. They showed their friendship through social media posts. On October 14, 2012, Annel uploaded a photo with Erandi, expressing her happiness for their friendship. Annel thanked God for the chance to be close to her and even wrote that Erandi had become not just a friend, but a sister to her. Initially, everything was wonderful, but over time, the situation changed. Although they were the same age, their personalities were completely different. Annel was a sweet girl who loved love songs and spending time with her family. In contrast, Erandi lived in Vice's environment and became increasingly involved with drugs, also known in Mexico as bucona. Erandi frequently attended events featuring musicians from this culture, such as the Caliber 50 concert during the Carnival celebrations in Guamuchil in 2014. She also had a very clear political stance. Once, Erandi posted on social media that she took part in a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Lora. On her page, she wrote, "March for El Chapo's freedom. We must rally behind this great cause." This message was accompanied by a photo. Unlike Erandi, Annel usually didn't share her point of view on social media and didn't agree with the views Erandi supported. As a result, the distance between them grew. In 2014, Erandi and Annel of them started attending Guamuchil High School at the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they barely spoke to each other. Each found her own group of friends. Annel began spending time with Melissa, Karen, Manuel, and Maria Jose. These friends had healthy lifestyles, followed her everywhere, and admired her. Maria, who had known Annel since elementary school, saw her as the leader of the group. Annel took on this role, and she always looking out for everyone. Annel was very polite and organized. Despite growing apart from Erandi, but she never told her father or siblings about their falling out. Around the same time, Erandi started acting strangely on social media. She posted negative and concerning messages on her page. Some posts were quite alarming, such as pregnant 13-year-old girls taking psychoactive substances, and bizarre statements such as, her mom is upset that she killed her ex and buried him in her garden, or, it is fortunate that she is envied by the dead. The initial posts didn't make much sense, as Erandi took them from forums or songs. However, with time, some messages began to appear threatening. On February 5, 2014, she posted that she was going to bury someone by the end of the year. On February 23, she wrote that she might seem very calm, but in her head, she had killed the person at least 3 times, and every day her mind was filled with new ideas. A few days later, Erandi wrote that she thanked God no one heard her thoughts, and everything would definitely happen the next day. She kept writing more and more posts, and became very creepy. On March 3, Erandi posted, "Maybe not now and not tomorrow, but soon, she won't say anything to that person, but that person should know that she has destroyed them mentally. The last post was on March 16th, where she wrote, "This really drives she to despair." No one in her circle knew who these threats were directed at. However, rumors started to spread at school. Many said that Arandi was upset with Anil because they were no longer friends. Some even accused Arandi of being jealous of Anil because everyone liked her. However, Anil wasn't worried about Arandi's social media posts. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, wearing a beautiful pink dress, and was the star of the evening. Her life seemed perfect until March 19th, when her absence raised concerns in her family. Hugo received a call from Adriana's school, informing him that Anil hadn't picked her up as usual. Initially, he wasn't too concerned, thinking she might have overslept or was with friends after school. He quickly went to pick up Adriana. On the way, Hugo tried calling Anil to see if everything was fine, but she didn't answer. He assumed she was probably still sleeping. After picking up Adriana, Hugo tried to contact Anil again, but she didn't answer. He repeatedly called her number, without success, which made him more worried. Hugo headed to her house in the Los Fuentes area. When he arrived, he noticed the front door was wide open. Upon entering the living room, both he and Adriana saw that some items had been moved. They thought it might have been a robbery. After that, they shouted Anil's name and searched desperately throughout the house, but they also couldn't find her. Finally, Hugo arrived in Anil's room and found the door locked, which worried him. He knocked several times, but Anil didn't answer. In desperation, Hugo broke down the door. Inside, he was shocked to find Anil's lifeless body on the floor, covered in numerous wounds with blood stains around. He immediately called the police, who arrived quickly. Upon examining the scene, the officers initially believed that a very strong person or a group had committed the crime. Although there were some blood stains, they were minimal, suggesting the attacker had attempted to clean them up. During the autopsy, the forensic expert revealed that Anil had suffered 65 stab wounds. The officers concluded that the attack was driven by someone with intense hatred towards her. The detectives noticed that the doors and windows were not forced, suggesting Anil knew the assailant and allowed them into the house. They even considered the possibility that Anil had planned to meet this person that day. However, a check of her mobile phone revealed no evidence of any invitation to her home. It seemed more likely that the encounter was by chance. With no surveillance cameras in the area, the officers interviewed neighbors. Some neighbors reported seeing a slender girl with black hair leaving the house. These accounts helped narrow down the suspects. Afterward, officers began questioning Anil's close friends and family. All her relatives had alibis and insisted that Anil had no enemies, was very friendly, and they couldn't imagine anyone wishing her harm. However, detectives found a post on Arandi's social network very suspicious, where she expressed shock at Anil's death. Some people offered their condolences, but others began accusing Arandi of being the murderer. The post quickly filled with comments blaming Arandi and claiming she was guilty. She then deleted her account's social network, but by then, it was too late. Police questioned several of Anil's friends to understand the relationship between Arandi and Anil. They all said that the two of them no longer played together, and it was clear that Arandi envied Anil for her greater popularity. After the interviews, detectives checked Arandi's social media profiles and found all the threatening posts she had made a few months earlier. However, that wasn't their only discovery. Just a few hours after it happened, Arandi posted that she was a fool and wondered what she had done. She was identified as the only suspect in the crime. This information was kept secret because officers worried Arandi might flee before they could arrest her. The agents patiently waited for the right moment. The case gained so much attention that hundreds of people gathered at a well-known funeral home in Guamachil to say goodbye to Anil. Friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and hugged each other, struggling to believe that someone so young had passed away. Anil's funeral was very crowded, but two people were particularly noticeable: Arandi and her mother. Arandi entered the venue with her head down, and her long black hair partially hid her face. Her outfit was unusual for the hot weather. She wore a hoodie with the hood up and long sleeves, as if trying to hide something. Both she and her mother approached to offer condolences to Anil's family, then sat near the casket containing Anil's body. Everyone whispered and watched Arandi with tense expressions, noting how distressed she seemed. A few minutes after she arrived, officers quietly approached her and asked her to come with them to the police station. Arandi did not resist and went with the officer. The questioning started at the police station. At first, Arandi claimed to be innocent, but after a few questions, she broke down. She lifted her hoodie, showing scratches and bruises on her arms and torso. Arandi confessed that Anil caused these injuries while trying to defend herself. In December 2013, Anil posted a picture online with Arandi, where they appeared hugging, smiling, and partially naked. Arandi was upset because Anil posted a photo without her permission. She asked Anil to take it down, but Anil ignored her request. Eventually, Anil agreed to remove the photo, but by then, their friendship was broken beyond repair. The situation got worse when one of Arandi's classmates told her he had a compromising photo of her, which she suspected was the same one Anil had posted months earlier. From that point on, Arandi started thinking about how to get revenge. In the meantime, she expressed her anger on social media until she couldn't bear it anymore. On March 19, 2014, Arandi posted on her page, "In a world of 7 billion people, she only liked 3 of them." After that, she went to Anil's house in the Los Fuentes neighborhood. Arandi arrived at the door with 2 servings of ice cream and a big smile, saying she wanted to make amends and be friends again. Anil happily agreed and invited her inside. She even suggested they go upstairs to Anil's room on the 2nd floor to chat, just like old times. Once in the room, they started talking and eating ice cream. After a few minutes, Arandi suggested watching a movie. Arandi then said she needed to go to the bathroom and asked not to pause the movie. However, instead of going to the bathroom, Arandi went downstairs to the kitchen. She hid a sharp knife under her clothes and went back to the room where Anil was lying on the bed with her back to the door. Taking advantage of this, Arandi took out the knife and attacked her. Anil tried to defend herself by scratching, pushing, and punching, but she couldn't overpower Arandi. She lost too much blood and died, becoming a victim of a terrible crime. Arandi began to feel anxious, knowing she had to act quickly before Anil's family returned. She tried to clean up the blood using all the rags in the house, but there was so much that she could only clean a little. Eventually, she went to the bathroom, washed her hands, and changed into clothes from Anil's wardrobe. Then, Arandi closed the door to the room, leaving Anil's body inside, and ran out of the house, leaving the front door open. When Anil's relatives heard the story, they were outraged. They knew the tale about the photograph was false. Anil would never do such a thing, it wasn't in her nature. Additionally, Anil's friends stated they had never seen any such photograph. They argued that since both Arandi and Anil were quite popular, the photo would have certainly spread, and someone would have downloaded it. It became clear that envy was the real reason behind the crime. Nevertheless, the motive was no longer relevant. Arandi was the only suspect in the case. She was officially charged with involuntary manslaughter. The legal process moved quickly. 4 officers escorted Arandi to the juvenile court proceedings at the prosecutor's office that handles cases involving minors. After a hearing lasting 1.5 hours, Arandi was found guilty. Even though it was clear she had executed a premeditated plan and the murder was intentional, but because she is only 16 years old, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was transferred to the Juvenile Detention Center in Kakin-Kaloa. Anil's family thought justice had been served and that it was all over, but they were very wrong. The defense filed an appeal, arguing that the trial took place in Kakin, which was incorrect, as the crime happened in the jurisdiction of Los Machos. The higher court decided to reopen the trial, this time in the appropriate jurisdiction. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This decision made the public extremely angry. Hundreds of Mexicans and foreigners shared images on social media with signs demanding justice for Anil. Several polls were conducted in which more than 5 million users voted, considering Arandi's sentence to be unfair. Many wanted her to receive a much longer sentence. The trial was retried, and Arandi was sentenced again to 7 years in prison. Hugo spoke with journalists and expressed his discontent. Although the sentence was not reduced, he believed Arandi's age was no reason not to impose a longer sentence. He hoped that at least she would serve the prescribed number of years. However, this didn't happen. On July 6, 2016, Arandi's sentence was reduced to 5 years. It was also decided that with good behavior, she could be released even sooner. State police had to close the courthouse gates as many journalists attempted to photograph her. This case became one of the most prominent in the country. Hugo was not informed about this hearing, which deeply angered him, worsening the situation further. On Friday, September 23, 2017, a hearing was held to assess Arandi's behavior in light of changes to the federal juvenile justice law. She was released after serving 3.5 years of her original sentence. Hugo left the court very dissatisfied, feeling he had witnessed a great injustice. He expressed his disappointment because the legislative reforms seemed to favor offenders instead of the victims. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Lillelid family. Vidar Lillelid was from Bergen, Norway. At just 20 years old, he decided to Florida, USA, to pursue his dreams. As the youngest of 4 children, he had always been a modest homebody, filled with positivity and aspirations of having a wife, children, and a bright future. In February 1989, Vidar married Delfina Zelaya, an American of Honduran descent, whom he met through their mutual involvement in Jehovah's Witnesses. Then, they decided to move to Miami. In 1990, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Tabitha. However, they soon realized they wanted a quieter life away from the hustle and bustle of Miami, forcing them to seek a more peaceful place to raise their children. Vidar and Delfina found a home on the outskirts of Knoxville, in a suburb called Powell. This typical American suburb offered tranquility, beautiful natural scenery, and a tight-knit community. The young couple was warmly received by the locals, and it felt like their search for a better living environment had finally come to an end, allowing them to enjoy a serene life. In 1995, Vidar and Delfina welcomed their son, Peter. As time passed, they decided to move to a larger home where each family member could have their own room. In 1996, they found the house that was built 50 years earlier, known for its remarkable architectural design, located in the suburbs. Upon moving in, the family quickly began planning for the future. Their first priority was to renovate the old house extensively and build several outbuildings. The couple eagerly started the renovations house, focusing on the guest house. Although the young family was not wealthy and chose the house for its affordability, they were aware of the significant work ahead and were motivated to tackle the difficulty together. Friends and relatives remembered Vidar and Delfina was enthusiastic people, attached to their faith, family, and aspirations. They worked diligently, with Delfina employed at a local restaurant and dedicating her free time to her family. The couple was very religious, and in April 1997, their local congregation organized a special event in a neighboring state for those interested in deepening their faith and learning effective practices. On April 6, 1997, the final day of the meetings, the congregation invited the family to dinner. However, Vidar and Delfina want to get home because didn't have enough money for the meal. They had already spent most of their savings on the trip and new clothes for the convention. The young couple, along with their children, thanked the congregation for the invitation but chose to celebrate in a smaller setting instead. To commemorate the occasion, Vidar and Delfina planned a picnic on their way back to create a festive atmosphere for the children. They began their journey, but during the drive, their son, Peter, started experiencing a severe headache and complained to his parents. It was already 7:30 p.m., and darkness was approaching. Vidar decided to pull off the highway in Greene County, Tennessee. He parked at a rest stop and took a walk with his son to help him feel better. Meanwhile, Delfina and Tabitha went to the restroom, where they ran into some unfamiliar girls. As they waited at the restroom exit, Peter was already outside with his father, Vidar. After their short walk, the boy felt better, and they waited for Delfina and Tabitha to return so they could have a snack. At that moment, several people noticed them. In Knoxville, a small motel housed a group of young people from Kentucky who had moved into one of the rooms. The group consisted of 6 individuals: 18 years old Natasha Cornett, 17 years old Karen Howell, 20 years old Joseph Reisner, 14 years old Jason Bryant, 19 years old Edward Dean Mullins, and 18 years old Crystal Sturgill. Many of them faced legal issues, had abusive parents, and came from troubled family backgrounds, often dealing with domestic violence and academic struggles. These young people banded together to live and often lived together in a motel, often renting a room for a long period of time. On April 4th, they checked into a motel in Columbus, just days before the incident occurred in Tennessee. Their unusual and daring behavior quickly attracted the attention of the motel staff. They drew pentagrams and other symbols on the walls, feeling liberated and free from the supervision of older generations. This led them to disregard moral and social norms. Initially, their actions seemed to have a connection to occultism and self-harm. At night, candles flickered outside the motel windows. These young people used razors to cut their hands, which was both a protest against their difficult experiences and a silent plea for help that went unnoticed. This group was an attached relationship, with most having endured years of cruelty and oppression, ultimately leading to a series of the tragic incidents. The young people often acted inappropriately and caused big damage to the motel room. They broke furniture and painted on the walls, turning the room into a place resembling a drug den. Some of their actions appeared ritualistic, reflecting their inner turmoil. They actively took part in occult practices linked to Satan, but they sought to push the boundaries further. Psychiatrists who worked with these young people later realized that they were searching for their identity in life. Unfortunately, they had experienced years of abuse and cruelty, leading to a deep-seated resentment towards the world around them. In this environment, violence and bloodshed became common and a way for them to assert power among their peers. It's clear that their minds were not filled with good intentions or kindness. They formed a secretive community that was prepared for more than just drawing pentagrams. They were out for revenge. The most ruthless leader of this group was Natasha Cornett, who stated her intention to start Armageddon and insisted that nothing would stop them. They were resolute in their desire for revenge against the world. Before Natasha, there had been similar confessions, but they were largely overlooked. This lack of attention to her words likely contributed to her extreme actions. Natasha stated that she had been communicating with angels and demons since she was a child. From a young age, she referred to herself as the daughter of Satan and became obsessed with witchcraft, which worsened due to alcohol and drug abuse. In 7th grade, she developed an eating disorder that eventually resulted in her hospitalization in Lexington. Doctors diagnosed her with severe manic-depressive tendencies and a propensity for self-harm and harming others. At 14, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for troubled teenagers. The doctors worked hard to help her with her social and family issues, but unfortunately, their efforts did not yield the desired results. At 17, Natasha fell in love and married a man named Stephen Cornett. However, when Stephen realized that Natasha had serious emotional issues and posed a danger to herself and others, he decided to end their relationship. This breakup deeply affected Natasha, who was already struggling with her mental health, and her condition worsened after she moved to New Orleans. There, she suffered a brutal attack by 5 men, which resulted in severe emotional trauma and further deterioration of her mental state. Natasha became obsessed with the movie Natural Born Killers, which features a young couple traveling across America and committing murders. At one point, she threatened her mother with a knife and ran away from home. During this period, she was at her most unstable, posing a genuine threat to herself and those around her. She sought a way to bring her dark fantasies, inspired by the film, to life. After leaving home, Natasha met a group of people who shared the same difficulties as her. Among them was her best friend, Karen Howell, who was also interested in witchcraft. Karen came from a troubled family and had a history of substance abuse and alcohol problems. She often caused disruptions, both at home and elsewhere. During her school years, she witnessed her parents' tumultuous relationship, including violent arguments and physical abuse from her father. Like Natasha, Karen struggled with thoughts of self-harm and attempted to end one's own life 4 times. Karen's behavior was very unstable, making she could not integrate at school because she was often scolded and criticized by her teachers. She changed schools 4 times and eventually ended up being homeschooled. However, being at home with toxic parents only made her situation worse. During this time, she began holding spiritual sessions in an attempt to communicate with demonic beings, which was made worse by regular substance use. Karen became a passenger in a car that was transporting weapons for a gang. Driving the unreliable car was her boyfriend, Joseph Reisner, who was born in Khazar on October 13, 1976. He never knew his biological father and took on his stepfather's surname when the family moved to Georgia. Joseph's parents' relationship deteriorated significantly, leading to their divorce. His mother, Mary, became actively involved in church activities. By then, Joseph had a reputation as a drug user. He started using drugs at the age of 10 and quickly progressed to harder substances. Joseph claimed to have had intimate experiences with 2 nannies who took care of him. His mother remarried when he was 18, but he continued to use illegal drugs, struggling to connect with his peers. He dated Natasha for a while but broke up with her, although they remained friendly. He then began a relationship with Natasha's best friend, Karen. In December, Joseph joined the army, hoping to build a military career. However, he struggled with substance abuse and was discharged. Feeling lost, he decided to leave everything behind and join a group led by Natasha. During this time, Natasha began dating Edward Dean Mullins, who was born on January 26, 1978. Edward came from a reputable family and did not usually have problems with the law. He worked at a grocery store and was very religious, attending church with his family. However, this changed after he met Natasha. She begins to control him, causing his behavior to change in a worrying direction. He stopped attending church and sided with Natasha against his parents, who were trying to help him return to a healthier life. Sadly, Natasha's influence outweighed his mother's concerns. Edward eventually ran away from home and moved into a motel. Their relationship deepened to the point where they began planning a wedding. The youngest member of the group was 14 years old Jason Bryant, born on July 18, 1982, in the small coal mining town of Helia. Despite his age, he had been on the police's radar for some time. His problems began after he using drugs and alcohol. In fact, his struggles started even earlier, as he had a developmental delay discovered in school, with an IQ of only 85. This thing caused emotional and social issues that negatively affected his life. His parents were indifferent to his struggles, and it was only after meeting Natasha that he decided to become part of the group. During this time, he was involved in a rehabilitation program where specialists tried to help him improve his condition. Unfortunately, their efforts were not enough, and he ultimately gave up on trying to change. Jason and Natasha even engaged in drinking each other's blood, believing it to be a demonstration of their deep love, convinced that it would strengthen their connection. On March 13, 1979, in the city of Harold, there was a girl named Crystal Sturgill who excelled in her studies. However, her life changed when she began using substances during high school. Crystal started smoking in the locker room, which frustrated her teachers. More serious issues emerged in December 1996, when Crystal entered adolescence. She began arguing frequently with her parents and isolated herself at home, which eventually led to her filing a police report. Crystal accused her father of long-term abuse and rape. She claimed that this abuse only ceased after she began dating. Her father denied the allegations, calling her a liar. Following a trial, Crystal was placed under the care of social services. Over time, she lived with 13 different foster families before meeting Natasha and joining her group. In fact, Natasha's Armageddon Cornet plan is already starting to become a reality. On April 6, the group broke into the home of a police officer living nearby. The homeowner was OTV. They successfully entered, stealing pistols of the .&P caliber, 2 boxes of ammunition, and $500 in cash. This marked the beginning of their plot for the apocalypse becoming a reality. Afterward, they returned to Nashville to commence their violent rampage. The group, made up of reckless young people, was traveling in a car that was in poor condition, seemingly on the verge of breaking down. The driver, worried about the car's reliability, was speeding over 30 kilometers per hour above the limit when the police stopped them. They received a fine, but this was just one of many legal issues they would encounter. Ultimately, the 6 Satanists, including Natasha, Edward, Joseph, Jason, Karen, Crystal, armed and prepared, safely reached their destination. They understood that they needed a reliable car to execute their plans. A key task for them was to find an appropriate vehicle, which they planned to steal. They had to move fast before their Chevrolet completely failed. As they continued their journey, prepared for serious crimes, they came across a woman named Delphina Zelaya, who was heading home and had paused at a restroom. While Karen and Natasha went into the restroom, the rest of their group waited in the vehicle. They began discussing their criminal plans and suddenly remembered they had left evidence of their earlier speeding violation. At that moment, they had weapons and money with cartridges in the car, which made them realize they could face serious legal trouble. To avoid getting caught, they decided they needed to change cars. Initially, they considered burning the vehicle. Just then, they spotted Peter and his father, Vidar, as the Lillelid family parked nearby. Natasha's group immediately attracted the attention of the Lillelid family when they came out of the restroom. Delphina approaches Natasha and Karen, who are wearing multiple layers of clothing. She asked if they believed in God, but they said no. She then offered them a religious brochure, while her friendly husband, Vidar, invited the people in Natasha's group to join their picnic. Natasha's group, identifying as Satanists, saw that the family Lillelid had come in a van, which they thought was ideal for their malicious intentions. This sparked a dark plan in the minds of Natasha's group decided to act. They casually joined the family's Lilith meal. Joseph and Jason were the first to approach the table, followed closely by Natasha and Karen. Seizing the opportunity, Joseph slipped away to the car where Edward and Crystal were waiting. He quietly informed them that it was time to act. Joseph then and people in their group moved stealthily through the parking lot, ensuring no one was watching. Joseph aimed his gun at Vidar, apologized for the situation, and warned that nothing would happen if his family obeyed them. Raised the gun at Vidar, Joseph led him to the minivan. Vidar offered money and a car in exchange for his family release, but Natasha's group insisted on taking all his family to a remote location. They drove the entire family away, with Natasha, Karen, and Jason following closely behind. Joseph remained in his Chevrolet with Edward and Crystal. Vidar was driving the minivan, while one of the kidnappers, armed with a 9mm pistol, kept him under control. The company drove several kilometers before taking a turn onto the first side road they found. After traveling a bit further, they stopped in an isolated area. Holding hands tightly, Lilith family prayed to God for protection from their predicament. Meanwhile, Natasha's group began to discuss their next steps. Natasha hesitated to release Lilith's family for fear they might report them to the police. Vidar and his family were once again offered money in exchange for their freedom, pleading to be released with a promise not to inform the police. Natasha's group argued among themselves, with some advocating for the execution of the entire Lilith family. Jason was against releasing Lilith family, but assured that he would not harm Tabitha and Peter. He persuaded Karen and Natasha to go back to the van where Joseph was waiting. Shortly after, gunfire erupted in the street during the summer. Vidar was shot multiple times. The first bullet struck his eye, followed by 5 shots fired at close range into his chest using 2 pistols stolen from a police officer. The assailant then shot Delfina 8 times, with 2 bullets breaking her femur, 1 hitting her arm, and ultimately, she was shot in the stomach while already on the ground. Both Delfina and Vidar were killed with pistols of different calibers. The medical examiner concluded that 28-year-old Delfina did not die instantly. Instead, it struggled for about 20 minutes after the attack. Unfortunately, Natasha's group did not stop there. They broke their promise and they turned to attack Tabitha and Peter. With Tabitha, they shot her once in the head with a .25 caliber weapon. As for Peter, they fired 2 shots. The first bullet entered behind the right ear and exited through the right eye, while the second shot hit the back and pierced the right lung. This account of incident is based on the testimony of Natasha Cornett, whose story aligns most closely with the evidence. However, she is not considered completely reliable. From the start, Natasha claimed that Jason was responsible for the murders. In contrast, Jason defended himself by stating that he could not commit such acts of cruelty and pointed to Joseph as the actual killer. At that time, Joseph said he was sitting in the van with his eyes closed to avoid seeing what was happening outside. He alleged that all the criminals, including Natasha, Edward, Jason, Karen, and Crystal, were involved in the massacre, but Jason was identified as the scapegoat because he was a minor and could not be tried as an adult. Such a terrible crime could lead to the death penalty. The criminals were caught fairly quickly. A construction worker at a nearby site, who had spent the night in the building, heard gunshots. At first, he thought they were just hunters and ignored them. However, after a disturbing silence, he heard loud laughter, which made him uneasy. He described the laughter as sending shivers down his spine, followed by more gunfire. This combination of frightening sounds raised his suspicions, leading him to call the police. At the crime scene, the police encountered a shocking sight. 4 bodies were piled in a ditch. As officers got closer, they found Delfina in pain, but she died shortly after their arrival. Vidar was already dead, and Tabitha was lying face down on him. Despite her severe gunshot wound, Tabitha was still breathing. When a police officer approached, he found Peter lying there. The boy cried, and the officer stayed with him while immediately calling for medics. The officer comforted Peter by holding his hand until the ambulance came. Tabitha and Peter were then airlifted to a regional hospital where they fought for their lives with the help of doctors. Sadly, 6-year-old Tabitha did not survive. Nearby, an abandoned blue Chevrolet still faintly illuminated the darkness with its headlights. Tire tracks belonging to a family van were also discovered at the scene. A plan was devised to track down the criminals, leading to the blockage of all nearby roads. Police stopped vehicles, focusing on a Chevrolet abandoned by the miners known at the scene of a massacre. Although the car's identification number was found, it had been removed and discarded about a kilometer from the site. The police then contacted Joseph's mother, who had reported him missing 2 days before the incident. She also mentioned Natasha, whom Joseph intended to elope with to Mexico. Their vehicle was detained at the Mexican border, where they had no identification documents. On April 8, around 5 p.m., they arrived at the U.S. border, and their car was checked against a database. It was discovered that the van was stolen and that the individuals might be involved in a triple murder. As a result, the group comprised of Natasha Cornett, Edward Dean Mullins, and Crystal Sturgill was arrested. After being detained, they quickly confessed to stealing the car and admitted to their involvement in the murders. They started telling a ridiculous story claiming that the Lillelid family died in an accident, saying they had been run over by a minivan during a U-turn. However, the police were aware that the Lillelid family had actually been shot, with gunshot wounds on their arms and legs. There were many conflicting accounts about how these injuries occurred. The judge received multiple requests from the defense to hold separate hearings for each defendant. The lawyers also asked for individual hearings. But all these requests were denied. For older defendants, including Natasha, Edward, Crystal, Joseph, faced the possibility of the death penalty, while Karen and Jason could receive life sentences without the chance of parole. The local community rallied together, demanding the death penalty for these violent criminals. Each hearing attracted a crowd outside the court, chanting for justice. During the interrogations, each person in Natasha's group attempted to blame one another for the crime. Most of them pointed fingers at Jason, citing his young age as a reason for their accusations. However, their accounts were all inconsistent, making it difficult to establish a clear timeline of incident or determine who actually shot Lillelid family. This uncertainty has led to ongoing debates, but the judge concluded that each member of the group contributed to the circumstances that resulted in the family's shooting. While not everyone pulled the trigger, all were present during the kidnapping and murder and did nothing to intervene. Despite having the chance to help, but none of them tried to save the Lillelid family, resulting in their shared guilt. The hearings commenced in March 1998. By this time, all 6 individuals had, including Natasha, Edward, Crystal, Joseph, Jason, Karen, on their lawyer's advice, pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal with the prosecution. This agreement secured them life sentences without the possibility of parole and allowed them to avoid the death penalty. However, many local residents opposed this thing, calling for the execution of the underage offenders. The 6 individuals are still seeking to have their cases reviewed, arguing that they were too young to fully understand their actions and that they were unable to resist the influence of the others. They continue to deny their involvement and shift blame among themselves. The first person to appeal was the group leader, Natasha, who, along with the others, was denied in 2017. Karen submitted a letter claiming her innocence, stating that she did not participate in the shooting of the Lillelid family and did not deserve life imprisonment alongside the actual murderers. She also addressed rumors that their group was a cult and that they arranged the bodies in a cross shape, asserting that these accusations were false and that they were merely a group of troubled teenagers. However, Karen's appeal was also denied because it was impossible to ascertain the level of involvement of each group member in the crime. 2 years old, Peter was the only survivor from Lilolid's family. The boy underwent a long recovery process, both mentally and physically, and now wears an eye prosthesis. Later, a custody battle ensued between the Vidar and Delfina families for Peter's care. In the end, he moved to Sweden to live with his aunt. Although he never completely overcame the trauma, he returned to the US as an adult, where he started a family and built a career. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of McDonald family. Jeffrey McDonald was born on October 12, 1943, in New York, USA. He was a well-known figure in his youth, serving as the quarterback for his high school football team and being very popular among his peers. After graduating from Princeton, Jeffrey attended medical school and completed an internship at a prestigious medical center in New York. He married Colette Stevenson, a high school acquaintance. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed their daughter Kimberly, and 3 years later, their son Kristen was born. After completing his education, Jeffrey joined the Army and was later accepted into the elite Green Berets. In the next 2 years, Jeffrey was assigned to the Fort Bragg military base in North Carolina. After a period of frequent relocations, their life finally became stable. They settled in the nearby city of Fayetteville and lived in a house provided by the state. Jeffrey returned home from work at 6 p.m. and no longer had to go on business trips, which allowed Colette to feel more at ease. She hoped that once Jeffrey completed his service in a few years, they could move to their own farmhouse, away from the city's hustle and bustle. At the time of the tragedy, Colette was pregnant with their third child, and everything seemed perfect. Their love story tragically turned into one of the most horrific crime episodes in U.S. history. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on February 17, 1970, the operator of the Fayetteville Rescue Service received a call from a man identifying himself as Captain Jeffrey McDonald. He reported that a violent attack had taken place in his home, stating that his wife had been stabbed to death and possibly raped. He was unclear about the fate of his children and urged for immediate assistance. The dispatcher quickly dispatched a police car to the scene. As the police were heading to the house, they saw a strange woman standing in the rain at 3:55 a.m., wearing a wide-brimmed hat. She was doing nothing and appeared to be waiting for something. However, the officers didn't have time to investigate further, so they drove past her. A few minutes later, they arrived at the Jeffrey family home, where the police entered through the back door because the lights inside were off. In the first room, officers discovered the body of a woman lying on the floor, showing no signs of life. She was covered in blood, and her position suggested she may have been raped. Her face was severely disfigured. She lay on her back next to her injured husband. As the first officer approached, Jeffrey urgently inquired about the fate of his children, whom he had heard screaming but could not get to. Another police officer searched the other rooms and found a brutal scene in the children's bedroom, where they discovered the mutilated head of 5-year-old Kimberly, with her neck and upper body also bearing multiple stab wounds. In another room, 2-year-old Kristen lay on the bed, suffering from multiple injuries to his back and chest. Jeffrey was in serious condition, having been stabbed in the head and upper chest. At one point, he lost consciousness, but a police officer was able to revive him to gather information about the incident. Jeffrey reported that 3 men and 1 woman had broken into the house. He suspected they were hippies, noting that one of the men was dark-skinned and wore a jacket with a sergeant's insignia. He also described a suspicious woman in a hat whom the police had encountered earlier, but unfortunately, it was too late to find her that night. Jeffrey was the only survivor of the attack that night, while the others sadly did not make it. He received first aid to treat his wounds, including a serious lung injury, and was given a sedative. Once stabilized, police spoke with him about the incident. He recounted that he and his wife had shared a glass of orange juice mixed with alcohol that evening. Since their daughter was sleeping, he decided to sleep on the couch in the living room. Jeffrey falls asleep in front of the TV but suddenly wakes up to intense pain. He is being attacked by 3 unidentified assailants. A woman in a hat stands to one side, holding a flashlight or candle, watching the attack. Jeffrey thinks the attackers look like hippies on drugs. The woman gives orders to the men. Chaos then erupts, and Jeffrey loses consciousness. When he regains consciousness, he finds his wife unresponsive. He tries to give her first aid, but to no avail. Desperate to get to his children, he finds himself unable to move due to his injuries, so he calls 911. The Army Criminal Investigation Department sent the most inexperienced police staff to the scene. After examining the area, he concluded that Jeffrey's story was not true. The officer found the story of Jeffrey, with the hippies, unlikely. He found no evidence that others were present. After this decision, the investigation shifted its focus to proving Jeffrey's guilt. The head of the McDonald family was arrested and Jeffrey was charged with 3 counts of criminal conspiracy. The case quickly turned into a disaster. From the outset, Jeffrey's defense attorneys aimed to assess the professionalism of the police during the search of the house. Through cross-examination, it was discovered that numerous violations had occurred. The procedures used had compromised the integrity of the evidence and the crime scene. The area had been essentially trampled, making it extremely difficult to identify any traces left by the criminals. This situation allowed the defense to argue that the prosecution's conclusion about Jeffrey's involvement in the crimes was incorrect, and that the killers were strangers, hippies. Jeffrey was a devoted family man, a caring father and husband, and a respected professional. As a result, he had many supporters, including colleagues who believed in his innocence. They felt there was no motive for the murder and found it hard to believe he would harm himself just to fake a near-death experience. His grandfather, Freddie Cassap, was so upset that he started a nationwide campaign to prove Jeffrey's innocence. Meanwhile, an article criticized the military justice system for holding closed hearings that excluded the public and the media. The situation did not improve. The trial remained hidden from public view, with more evidence later presented to the Supreme Court highlighting police incompetence. The investigation was sloppy. The ambulance driver tampered with evidence at the scene and even stole Jeffrey's wallet while police were present. An Army doctor compromised crucial evidence, including hair samples needed for comparison. Fingerprints were mixed up with various items such as a phone and a baby bottle. Most of the people involved in the investigation were inexperienced and unprofessional. The number of violations identified continued to grow with each minute of questioning. The investigation received an unexpected tip about a young woman seen on the street in the rain, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Her name was Helena Stokely. Helena was the daughter of a retired Army officer and had a troubled connection with the criminal world. While she was a police informant, she was also deeply involved in the hippie culture and had been selling illegal substances for many years. The police interviewed Helena and obtained valuable information about her associates. However, serious mistakes occurred during the interrogation. Notably, the police failed to record the conversation, which was necessary for presenting evidence in court. The inexperienced police claimed that the investigation into Helena's involvement was still ongoing. However, the situation worsened so much that the police simply did not know where she was. She fled when everyone realized the full scale of the incompetence that was committed during the Army investigation. The investigation must start all over again on all issues. Despite this, the military leadership still kept the hearing closed to the media. Meanwhile, one police officer chose to share information with journalists about the mistakes made by the Army Commission of the Armed Forces. This angered the military leadership even more. While everyone else believed he was innocent, the military commission refused to acknowledge their own incompetence. Unfortunately, they held significant power and were unwilling to back down. They asserted that, although there was no clear motive for the crime, Jeffrey might have used substances that could provoke aggression and potentially lead to murder. Contrary to the prosecution's allegations, witnesses began to testify that Jeffrey was a loving husband and father. The defense presented a large body of evidence in support of this view. Furthermore, at the time of the massacre, Jeffrey was in a stable mental state. Only a small amount of alcohol was found in his system, which would not have significantly impaired his judgment or led him to commit such violent acts. Along with friends and family who testified, qualified experts, including a psychiatrist, evaluated Jeffrey and concluded that he was sane and had no homicidal tendencies toward his family. Even the civil police believed that Jeffrey was innocent due to the lack of evidence against him. His mother had to sell their house to afford legal fees. Ultimately, he was cleared of charges due to insufficient evidence. However, this did not stop the Army Commission from reopening the investigation later on. The military police promised to persist in their efforts to convict Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, regardless of the previous investigation's flaws. They believed that their earlier mistakes did not rule out the possibility of Jeffrey's guilt. The situation was not serious and did not significantly affect the outcome. Jeffrey resigned from the U.S. Army. Disillusioned with the military, he began a campaign to expose the armed forces through the media. However, he was unaware of the powerful enemies he was facing and the dangers that would be placed upon him. Meanwhile, the police found Helena Stokely. She claimed to have witnessed the murder of the MacDonald family, allegedly committed by her friends. Helena was willing to testify in court, hoping to be granted immunity from prosecution. Her testimony was verified through a lie detector test. Despite this, the military leadership refused to consider any other suspects, focusing solely on Jeffrey and preparing to charge him again. In the summer of 1971, Jeffrey and a friend moved to Long Beach, California, in search of a fresh start. Initially not realizing that a conspiracy was brewing against him, they both found jobs in the emergency department of a medical center, where their efforts helped make it the best department in the entire facility. Jeffrey's skills were highly regarded, leading to his work being published in medical journals. He also became an advocate for children's rights, fighting against child abuse. The military prosecutor's office continued to reopen the case, and on the grounds that they had obtained Jeffrey's psychiatric reports, he was charged again. The trial was scheduled for mid-1979 and a smear campaign began. It was a high-profile case, and from the start, the armed forces were formed to fight Jeffries. And at that time, people from the highest echelons of power rallied against Jeffrey, a former Army captain. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Blackburn wanted to use the case as a springboard for his career. He was later convicted of forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. But at the time of the triple murder retrial, Jeffrey's reputation was impeccable. The assistant prosecutor had concealed evidence that proved Jeffrey's innocence. And the Attorney General was not even allowed to conduct his own independent examination of the evidence collected or review the case file. It was clear that the judge was biased toward the prosecution, which affected the outcome of the trial. Any evidence that could have proven that Jeffrey innocent was not presented to the jury or provided to Jeffrey's attorney. For example, the victim was found holding 5 strands of light-colored hair. The prosecution claimed that these hairs came from a doll owned by the victim's daughter. However, they actually belonged to Helena Stokely, who was wearing a light-colored wig that she removed shortly after the murder. Additionally, a hair belonging to Jeffrey was found in the victim's hand, but since he lived there, this was not unusual and could have been a coincidence. This evidence did not prove Jeffrey's guilt. The skin particles found under Kimberly and Kristen's fingernails were not their father's and were identified as belonging to the attackers. However, the particles were never analyzed and eventually disappeared. This evidence, along with much else that could have proven Jeffrey's innocence, was deliberately ignored at trial. A key part of the prosecution's case was the pajama fibers found on the chisel believed to have been used to kill Jeffrey's children. The prosecution claimed the chisel was the weapon used and contained particles from the clothing Jeffrey was wearing when police found him on the night of the triple murder. Years later, it was discovered that these claims were false. Police found several black fibers on the chisel that matched those found on the bodies of Kristen and Kimberly. However, these fibers did not match any of the clothing from the McDonald's home. Additionally, wax droplets were found at the crime scene that did not match any of the candles from the victims' homes. These wax droplets were actually used by Helena Stokely in her rituals. Helena claimed to be a witch and practiced magic, which became a key factor in the case. The prosecution made a strong claim that fibers from Jeffrey's pajamas were found in Colette's hair. However, this claim was later proven to be false. The defense attorney, Jeffrey, was unable to object to this assertion at the hearing because it had never been mentioned before. There were also other false pieces of evidence, including claims of bloody marks on the couple's bed sheets, which the prosecution argued indicated that the husband had dragged his wife's body. It was later revealed that these bloody marks did not exist. Furthermore, the prosecution was unaware of important information at the hearing. Specifically, the prosecution was unaware that Helena Stokely had contacted the FBI in 1978, claiming that she was involved in a triple homicide while she was being treated for depression and had attempted to end her life in the hospital. During the trial, Helena said that on the day of the massacre, she was with her boyfriend Greg Mitchell and some soldiers from Fort Braga. They were all using drugs, and according to her, they lost control. Helena mentioned that she called the McDonald family's house late at night to check if everyone was home, but she couldn't remember what happened afterward. The military police then approached her, and she felt so intimidated that during the second trial, she was unable to recount events between midnight and 5 a.m. However, she did acknowledge having a hat and a light wig, which were later destroyed because they could potentially serve as evidence against her. At trial, Helena claimed she had been present at the massacre, holding a candle and muttering strange incantations. However, she maintained that she had not harmed any of the McDonald family. She felt sick when her friends were near the children, prompting her to flee the house. It is thought that the murders were not random. Helena's friends may have been motivated by revenge. The soldiers were angry that Dr. Jeffrey had refused to give them illegal substances. Helena passed a polygraph test 3 times, and her statements were validated. Despite this, her testimony was deemed unreliable. The judge imposed restrictions on providing information about Helena and her soldier friends, which became one of the obstacles for Jeffrey's defense. The defense relied on the psychological profile and personal qualities of the accused to convince the jury of his inability to commit murder. The judge allowed the use of previously collected data, but only if Jeffrey underwent another examination by a psychiatrist. This request was of course a trap, as the psychiatrist had been cooperating with the military for 8 years while the investigation was ongoing. The prosecutor's office, eager to put Jeffrey behind bars for good, asked the doctor to make a finding. After a brief interrogation, the doctor declared Jeffrey a psychopathic murderer. Ultimately, the court refused to allow the use of Jeffrey's previous psychiatric records, which had been obtained from another psychiatrist. Instead, the jury was presented with the new psychiatrist's report, which had a devastating effect on the defense. The prosecution replaced Jeffrey's rosy image with that of a true monster. The jury found Jeffrey McDonald guilty of murdering his wife, Colette, and their 2 children, Kimberly and Kristen. Sentenced him to 3 life terms. Even with this, the revenge of the military police leadership was not over. After learning that Fort Braga soldiers had a serious problem with illegal substances, the unit's leadership was unprepared for such problems, which coincided with the emergence of the burgeoning hippie movement. Under Jeffrey, the situation became more difficult for the soldiers to access, which made them unhappy. Later, some gathered to go to Jeffrey's house to take revenge. Helena's guilt was unquestionable. Even her husband, whom she married in the 80s, believed she was involved. He thought she hadn't committed murder but was likely a witness the incident. Helena shared many details about the crime scene that had never been made public at the time. The girl was present in McDonald's house on that fateful night, and this is well established. She underwent 3 polygraph tests, all supporting her account of being there. Her testimony was also recorded on video. According to her, when they entered the house, they forced Jeffrey to write a prescription for Zach, which led to a fight that resulted in the murder of Jeffrey's family members. Jeffrey was left alive, turned into a martyr. The criminals wrote "Death to all pigs" on the wall, likely trying to imitate Charles Manson, who was widely known at that time. Helena passed away at the age of 30 due to complications from liver disease. This incident occurred in 1970, and Helena's testimony was recorded with the judge's approval. At the time of the triple murder, her boyfriend, Greg Michel, was a soldier struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from Vietnam. As a result, he started using drugs heavily and had to enter treatment once more due to his addiction. He later admitted to a friend that he was involved in the McDonald family's murder. At the crime scene, several pieces of evidence were collected, including Greg's blood and hair samples. It was noted that he was left-handed, and an independent expert determined that the knife wounds were likely made with the left hand. Additionally, he had liver issues, which prevented him from testifying during the trial. Jeffrey McDonald's fatal mistake was befriending writer Joe McGinnis. They met just before his retrial, and Jeffrey asked Joe to write a book about his case. Jeffrey believed this would give him an advantage in the upcoming hearings. Jeffrey then allowed Joe to attend all of the meetings in detail. In return, Jeffrey received a portion of the book's advance from the publisher and agreed not to contest the book's contents. The friendship between the two men grew stronger. Joe supported Jeffrey and convinced him that Joe was still defending Jeffrey's innocence. However, Joe eventually betrayed Jeffrey by portraying him as the true monster in his book. From private conversations, Joe discovered that just before the triple murder, Jeffrey had taken diet pills, which were quite strong at that time. Although this was an isolated incident, Joe exaggerated the situation, suggesting that Jeffrey was taking 3 pills daily, which could have led to a serious overdose. Joe claimed this was the cause of Jeffrey's anger and violent behavior towards his family. He even pointed to a specific incident: Jeffrey's daughter had wet his side of the bed. In a normal family, the father would not react angrily to such an incident, but Joe saw it as the reason why Jeffrey, the man who was supposed to love his family, lost control. Joe believed that, under the influence of drugs, he had gone psychotic and ended up killing an entire family. However, a toxicology test found no drugs in Jeffrey's system, only a small amount of alcohol. During the trial, Joe said he had changed his mind about Jeffrey's guilt, believing it was more financially beneficial to Jeffrey. The controversial book did significant damage to Jeffrey's reputation. As a result, support for Jeffrey's innocence dwindled. However, Jeffrey successfully sued the book's author for libel. In August 1980, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit seeking millions in damages. After several hearings, the court awarded him $325,000. While most of the compensation was placed in a trust, Jeffrey retained the right to continue his fight for justice against the author. Jeffrey's story resonated with many people. Several well-known lawyers believed in his innocence and volunteered their services to help secure his acquittal. Despite their efforts, numerous appeals were rejected in 1989. However, during the trial and the review of the court's decision, new evidence emerged that supported Jeffrey's claim of non-involvement in the triple murder, including results from examinations. Unfortunately, the same judge presided over the proceedings. This judge continued to hinder the defense team, demonstrating a lack of impartiality throughout the case. A significant breakthrough during this time was the advent of new DNA testing technologies that allowed Jeffrey's defense team to conduct their own analyses. Sadly, at this stage, the judge repeatedly obstructed the lawyers' efforts to seek justice. Information about Helena Stokely finally emerged. A video of her testimony was made available to the lawyers. By this point, Jeffrey, the wrongfully convicted man, had spent 20 years in prison but had never stopped fighting for his freedom. Meanwhile, the military prosecutor's office continued to resist, attempting to dispute all the new evidence. Additional witnesses were found, some of whom had been intimidated and coerced into supporting the prosecution. Stokely, the MacDonald family's nanny, admitted to the prosecution that she had been at the MacDonald's home during the murders. She also revealed that the prosecution had threatened to prosecute her if she testified in court, which discouraged her from speaking out. Prosecutor Blackburn was eventually convicted of several charges, including forgery, theft, and embezzlement, and was remanded in custody in January 2006. New evidence came to light, suggesting a possible retrial. First, a videotaped confession by Helena Stokely was made public, followed by the release of evidence supporting Stokely's claim. DNA testing showed that hair and tissue found on the victim did not match anyone known and belonged to a stranger. In March 2006, a man came forward to the police, claiming that he had been drinking regularly at a bar with a man who had confessed to the MacDonald murders. This man turned out to be Lena's boyfriend, Greg Mitchell. The last time he had heard details of the case was a few weeks before Greg's death. The cashier at the store near the house, Jeffrey, claimed that he saw a group of hippies enter the store the morning after the murders. They looked unkempt, were covered in blood, and were talking to each other about the crime they had committed. However, they then threatened him with his life. The cashier recognized Greg and Helena among this group. An employee at the rehabilitation center where Greg Mitchell was treated also claimed that he had repeatedly confessed to her that he had killed the Jeffrey MacDonald's wife and children, even writing his initials on the wall of the center. Unfortunately, all of this evidence was ignored by the court. 54 years have passed since the tragic murder of the MacDonald family. Defenders at the Supreme Court are still trying to prove Jeffrey's innocence by filing appeals. His most recent appeal against his conviction was in 2021, but was dismissed. Jeffrey remains in prison but still holds out hope that he will one day be free again. While in prison, he met Catherine, an activist involved in the Innocence movement, and they developed a relationship. She visited him regularly and eventually married. Catherine runs a website dedicated to Jeffrey's case, working to secure his release. The 80-year-old, who has spent most of his life in prison, argues that those who actually committed the crime are still walking free. Many of those responsible have lived their entire lives without facing justice, and some have even died without being held accountable for their actions. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathy Lamb. Kathy Lamb lived in an affluent area of Palm Beach. Kathy had a challenging childhood. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she lived with her father. During her teenage years, her mother was absent, which took a significant emotional toll on her. She was self-conscious about her weight, feeling larger than her peers. Fortunately, her stepmother was kind and supportive. Recognizing Kathy's insecurities, she helped her build her confidence, and over time, Kathy became more confident. She started playing sports and trying to lose weight. Kathy was very smart and kind, which helped her make friends in high school. She was active and cheerful, and her problems seemed to disappear when she was with her friends. One of those friends was Jeff. They met when he was 17 and she was 16, and they quickly felt a special connection. Their relationship continued even after they graduated. 2 years later, they secretly married, surprising their families. When their parents found out, they thought the couple was too young to make such a serious decision, but the couple was determined to stay together, despite family pressure. It seemed like the newlyweds had a bright future ahead of them. Jeff worked hard at a local repossessed car park, while Kathy found work as a pharmacist at a pharmacy. She had the necessary education and wanted to advance in the field. Over the years, Jeff remained a tow truck driver, while Kathy became a top pharmacist. A year later, she was offered a job as a district planner for distributing drugs to pharmacies, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. They achieved their dream of owning a home and enjoyed 12 happy years there until a devastating tragedy occurred. On June 15, 2004, Jeff returned home from work at around 7 p.m. He intended to invite his wife to dinner. However, as soon as he entered, he was horrified to see blood all over the hallway, running down the walls. The gruesome evidence of blood splatter and brain matter terrified him. As he called 911, he struggled to speak and held back tears. Initially, the operator mistook his cries for those of a woman, but Jeff eventually plucked up the courage to describe his home, which now looked like the set of a horror movie. At the end of the corridor, there was a significant amount of blood on one wall, as if it had been splattered. Facing this wall, about 1.5 meters away, similar splatters were visible on the opposite wall, and they extended down the stairs leading to the second floor. On the upper level, in the midst of the gruesome scene, lay 30-year-old Kathy, who was unresponsive. The operator attempted to guide Jeff over the phone to provide first aid, but Kathy's injuries were so severe that there was nothing that could be done. When the police arrived, they were taken aback by the horrific sight. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. Kathy's body showed multiple severe head injuries from heavy objects. Her skull and face were so badly damaged that they appeared completely disfigured. Although the murder weapon was not found at the scene, a thorough laboratory analysis determined that it was likely a long, heavy object with a hexagonal shape or similar features. Jeff mentioned that he had tried to call his wife several times after 5 p.m. but received no answer, which he found unusual. Concerned, he rushed home to meet her. It turned out that not only Kathy was injured, the couple had 3 large dogs in the house, Jeff's dog and his wife's 2 dogs. Tragically, both of his wife's pets were discovered badly beaten and lying on the floor next to their deceased owner. They had suffered severe head injuries and were barely alive. Unfortunately, the injuries were so extensive that the veterinarians had to euthanize the dogs to relieve their suffering. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff's dog was found locked in his owner's bedroom. Paws from all 3 dogs were found at the scene, along with blood that police believe did not come from the animals. They suspect the blood may have come from a struggle with the killer. The blood has been sent for analysis to determine its source and whether it can help the investigation, and they await the results. Police are uncertain whether the blood on the dogs came from Kathy or whether they fought with the attacker to protect her, resulting in their fatal injuries. Police found the dogs unharmed after the woman had been killed and the fight had begun. The amount of blood on the animals suggests that they had seriously injured the attacker, possibly lacerating an arm or leg. This means that the attacker would have bled profusely, possibly from an open wound, and that he would have sought medical attention at a hospital. The attacker's intentions remain unclear. He may have acted recklessly or out of a deep hatred for his victim, ignoring the large dogs that lived with the family. After examining the crime scene, the police still lacked any concrete leads. They had to wait for the autopsy results to gather more information. In the meantime, they checked all the local hospitals for the injured attacker. Several suspicious people came in with injuries that were found to be unrelated to the incident, as their injuries did not match those of a dog bite. The police began talking to local residents in the hope that someone had seen suspicious activity at Kathy's home or had noticed the criminal fleeing, possibly injured. Unfortunately, no one observed anything unusual. They were also trying to find a motive. Robbery seemed unlikely given the many valuables in the family's home. Only the gold earrings with diamonds that the Kathy was wearing during the attack were missing, while everything else remained untouched. Even the money, which was clearly visible, was not taken. It seems unlikely that a robber would ignore such an opportunity. There were no indications of a break-in, the furniture was undisturbed, drawers were not opened, and belongings were not scattered about, as thieves typically do when they search for valuables. This led the police to explore alternative motives and various theories. The forensic expert determined that the murder occurred between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Jeff, the first suspect who found the scene, had a strong alibi. At that time, he was on the job and was seen by numerous co-workers. Additionally, he showed no signs of injuries that would typically result from a struggle with the dogs. Just as police were about to clear Jeff of suspicion, an unknown young woman arrived at the family home. Joy Steele came to the house and introduced herself as Jeff's fiancée, which surprised the police, especially since Jeff had been crying earlier. The police found this an interesting case, as a man who had just lost his wife was being comforted by his mistress, with whom he had been in a serious relationship for a long time. This revelation made the case seem even more suspicious. 7 years into their relationship, Kathy discovered Jeff's infidelity. Despite this, they remained together and did not divorce. Kathy forgave him and even encouraged him to end the affair, leading to their reconciliation and continued life together just before the tragic incident. Police are considering whether a love triangle may have been a motive for the crime. Jeff had a strong motive for killing his troubled wife. That doesn't necessarily mean Jeff killed Kathy himself. He may have convinced someone else to do it. The police discovered a third dog locked in one of the rooms, which was unharmed. This was peculiar, especially given the serious injuries of the other 2 dogs belonging to the Kathy. Did the criminal truly hate her to the extent that he chose to ruin everything she cherished? The police needed to find answers to these questions. In the meantime, one of the police was questioning Jeff's mistress, Joy Steele, at the location of the incident. Joy shared her and Jeff's future plans. They planned to move away after a while Jeff planned to quit his job. Joy had a solid alibi. Joy, who was apparently working at a restaurant during the time of the murder, was present, and multiple people could confirm this. In addition, Joy had no injuries on her body. Although the suspicious couple could not have been directly involved in the murder due to their alibis and their lack of injuries, the police have not ruled them out as suspects given the serious circumstances surrounding the crime. They had a strong motive for their plan. The investigation into the crime and the hiring of the killer continues, with the police focusing on identifying potential enemies or those who may have wanted to harm Kathy. However, Kathy's friends and relatives have been unable to identify any enemies, with the exception of her husband. That same day, another suspect emerged. Jeff had another mistress named Lisa. A few weeks before the murder, Lisa's husband, Ray, discovered them together when he came home early from work and found Jeff shirtless on the couch. This confrontation led Ray to kick Jeff out of the house. The next day, Ray calls Lisa and threatens to kill Jeff if he continues with Lisa. Ray emerged as a potential suspect due to his violent nature and apparent motive. However, the situation raised questions about the Kathy. Why did Ray kill Jeff's wife? She had not harmed him and was actually the victim in the scenario, just like Ray. Despite this, Jeff continued to blame Ray. He believed that Ray had gone to the house to carry out his threat against Jeff, but Jeff was not home at the time. It is also possible that upon arriving at Jeff's house, Ray was in danger from Jeff's wife and dogs, so Ray felt compelled to kill her and the dogs. However, this motive does not fit with the extreme violence the killers showed towards Kathy. Her injuries were extremely brutal, suggesting that this was not a random crime, but an act of deep hatred. The police then turned their attention to Lisa, the second lover. Despite her husband's threats, she remained in contact with Jeff. Cell phone records confirmed that they frequently called and texted each other, including at the time of the Kathy's murder. Lisa and her husband Ray were both investigated, but they had solid alibis and were eliminated as suspects. However, the police decided to track the geolocation data of the lovers' mobile devices to gain more details. The call between Lisa and Jeff took place just minutes after the murder. Jeff's cell phone was found near his home, and Jeff was not at work at the time, contrary to what he had previously said. Additionally, Jeff's dog was unharmed, which seems more than just a coincidence. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the animals. They collected DNA samples from the dog's muzzle and paws. Notably, the stains found on Jeff's dog were identified as palm prints. Blood samples taken from the scene were confirmed to belong to the Kathy, indicating that the perpetrator was in the hall with the dog after the attack on Kathy, during which she was injured or possibly killed. Police suspected that the killer's DNA might be on the animal's muzzles and paws. However, the investigation disproved this theory, revealing that the blood was not human, but believed to be from dogs that may have been fighting each other. By analyzing all the new information, police were able to piece together a clearer picture of the events that occurred on that tragic day. Someone entered the house and discovered Kathy along with her 3 large dogs. The attacker hit the woman in the head with a heavy object. 2 dogs were present, also seriously injured and later died. And they did not attack the attacker. They endured the blows without defending themselves. The 3rd dog also did not confront the attacker. Instead, the 3rd dog focused on protecting the other 2 dogs. This behavior aroused suspicion. The police consulted dog handlers for insights. Experts suggested that the dog's lack of resistance indicated they were familiar with the attacker and viewed him as a friend. This familiarity explained why they did not confront him but instead appeared to bite each other. Police found bite marks on the dogs, leading them to conclude that only Jeff, the owner of the surviving dog, could have attacked Kathy. Additionally, geolocation data indicated that the Jeff was near the house, which supported their suspicions. However, the Supreme Court only had circumstantial evidence, meaning they still had a long way to go before bringing any charges. The police needed one crucial piece of information to strengthen their case. With no further clues, the police focused on investigating Jeff's personal life to understand what might have motivated Jeff to kill his wife. It turned out that the family had recently faced significant financial difficulties, which had affected Jeff for many years before these events. Jeff's boss caught him stealing a large sum of money, about $30,000. Jeff had not spent it all and agreed to return it. He also paid his boss $20,000 in restitution. The police then analyzed Jeff's activities. It turned out that his job brought in only a small income, just enough for his family's needs. He also spent money on his mistress. His wife's income was much higher, but he did not want to tell her about his problems. Jeff was characterized as someone without any remarkable business skills. He was neither particularly foolish nor exceptionally intelligent. His earnings were limited, making the compensation amount a serious financial burden for him. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he struggled to come up with the funds. Jeff sought ways to earn extra money or secure a loan, but all these efforts proved fruitless, and the total amount of compensation remained far beyond his reach. He later learned that he was the sole beneficiary of Kathy's life insurance policy, which was worth $29,000. Police believed that this amount of money could solve all of Jeff's financial problems. On the day of the incident, police collected the clothes he was wearing at the time. However, forensic experts conducted a quick test and found no blood or DNA from Kathy on his clothes. The suspect was wearing dark clothing, making it difficult to detect any blood stains. The experts meticulously studied every millimeter of the items using a microscope with 60,000 times magnification. Inside the jeans, they discovered several small red drops, which the forensic team identified as blood. This blood had seeped deep into the fabric fibers, suggesting that it was from high-velocity splashes. This evidence was consistent with the nature of the injuries sustained by the Kathy. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kathy. The police were further surprised when they examined the Jeff's other belongings. They found a gold earring embedded with a diamond in one of his trouser pockets, which he had claimed was stolen during an attack. This indicated that he likely staged the scene and hesitated to dispose of the item to avoid being caught at a pawn shop. To strengthen their case in court, the police needed to find the murder weapon. Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find the weapon. It took the prosecutor's office 2 months to establish a clear connection between the killer and the victim. During this time, an employee of the company where Jeff worked discovered a hexagonal crowbar on the roof of the building. The tool was standard equipment on the company's tow trucks and was available to all employees. What made the crowbar suspicious was the significant amount of blood found on it. The employee promptly notified the police of the discovery. Jeff claimed that he had lost his crowbar and was unable to provide it to the police. This raised suspicions that the bloody crowbar belonged to him and may have been hidden as the murder weapon. The crowbar was sent to a laboratory, where experts compared it to the injuries found on Kathy's head. They concluded that the shape of the tool matched the impact marks. Additionally, the blood found on the crowbar was confirmed to be Kathy's through analysis. Jeff was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Friends knew he had often complained about his troubled marriage. He claimed that Kathy couldn't manage household chores, which made him angry. However, he overlooked that she was the one supporting the family financially and covering their travel expenses, leaving her little time for housework. Jeff's car was always cluttered with garbage, yet he continued to blame Kathy. He frequently talked to friends about wanting to end their relationship, and several acquaintances reported that he was considering divorce. Kathy was unhappy in her marriage to Jeff due to his betrayals and chaotic lifestyle, which she knew about. She often vented her frustrations to friends but couldn't bring herself to leave him because she loved him deeply. Despite her unhappiness, she stayed with Jeff, trying to tolerate his behavior. For Jeff, murder seemed like a better option than going through a divorce. He was in dire financial straits after stealing $30,000 at work, which had severely impacted his finances. If he divorced Kathy, they would have to divide their assets, and he risked losing their home. He felt he had nothing left to lose, as a divorce would leave him with little since Kathy could claim most of their assets. Jeff figured that by committing murder, he could use the life insurance payout to pay off his debts, keeping part of the money to start a new life with his mistress. Jeff had promised to make a choice between his 2 girlfriends, Lisa and Joy, but the decision remained a secret. During the investigation, police uncovered more details about the crime. On the day it happened, Jeff left for work but had actually planned to kill his wife. He drove a tow truck to a gas station, pretending he needed to fill it up. His absence from work was noted, and during that time, he returned home to wait for his wife to return. He was familiar with her daily routine, so he did not have to wait long. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff brutally killed his wife's dogs with a crowbar. The dogs, confused and frightened, began to fight. To stop the chaos, Jeff hit each dog on the head and then took his pet, Netarunu, into a room and locked the door. After the incident, he removed his wife's diamond earrings, intending to make it look like a robbery. He discarded some of his clothes, taking off his shirt and shoes, but he kept the jeans he wore during the massacre, likely overlooking the bloodstains on them. This oversight allowed forensic experts to find tiny drops of blood on the jeans, linking him to the crime. His lover called him while he was near his home, which revealed his location on the phone. When he arrived at the station, he attempted to dispose of the crowbar used in the attack, but did so carelessly, simply throwing it onto the roof of a utility building and not washing it. He believed the tool would never be discovered. Jeff was convicted of premeditated murder due to financial difficulties he thought he could overcome by collecting life insurance from his wife's death. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the victim. His fingerprints were found on the crowbar, along with Kathy's blood on his clothing. He had attempted to stage a robbery and failed to completely conceal the earrings that were believed to have been stolen. Several people testified about domestic problems. Kathy still hoped to reconcile with her husband, despite being devastated by his betrayal. She truly loved him and was undaunted by his financial difficulties. What she craved most was love and understanding. Unfortunately, Jeff did not want to rekindle their relationship. Instead, he planned a murder that he believed would net him $29,000. It is suspected that Joy, one of Jeff's lovers, knew of his intentions. Jeff promised her a future together, on the condition that she pay off the debt he would incur from his crimes. During the hearing, the defense attempted to portray Jeff as a model husband and a good person, but no witness could reliably substantiate this claim. Jeff had never been a hard worker and showed little interest in his work. He had no motivation to do anything else and did not have a positive reputation in his family life. He was not a good husband, as he had a history of infidelity that his late wife knew about. His lifestyle was well known to friends and family. But it was his wife who suffered the most. When Jeff's efforts to build a better image failed, his attorney changed tactics. He began looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. However, the prosecution's strategy was well rehearsed and backed by substantial evidence, leaving little room for debate. The defense argued that Jeff was not the only possible suspect in Kathy's murder, claiming that the police had focused too quickly on him without fully exploring other potential suspects. In fact, police and the prosecutor's office had interviewed dozens of people and considered multiple suspects. Each suspect was thoroughly questioned, allowing police to eliminate those who did not fit the evidence. The prosecution argued that the attacker had two motives. First, he hoped to solve his financial problems through a life insurance policy. Second, he wanted to get rid of his troubled wife so he could live with one of his mistresses. Additionally, he sought to avoid the risk of losing his assets or having to divide his assets in a divorce. The prosecution also argued that Jeff's mistress, Lisa, knew about his plans. She supported him and was waiting for the call to hear about the progress of the crime. Her indiscretion led her to call Jeff, which provided the police with a vital clue. Investigations were conducted to determine whether the mistresses were involved in planning or organizing the crime, but the results were negative. However, it is clear that they supported the Jeff, even though they should have reported his bad intentions to the police to prevent the murder. Ultimately, no evidence was found to prove the lovers' guilt or involvement, so they faced no consequences in court. In September 2006, Jeff Lamb was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. As the verdict was read, Lisa wept uncontrollably in court. Kathy's family believes the court's ruling was fair. In Kathy's mother's opinion, Jeff should rot behind bars for the rest of his life. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18-year-old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4-year-old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Eapen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed, not threw him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, she expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Eapen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Eapen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Michelle Herndon. Michelle Herndon was born in 1981 in a small Florida town with a population of just 7,000. After finishing school, she enrolled at the University of Florida in Gainesville in 1999. Michelle joined the Peace Corps as a volunteer, assisting both people and animals. Michelle suffered from chronic, debilitating migraines. These attacks caused her to experience severe pain on a daily basis, accompanied by symptoms such as nausea and extreme sensitivity to light, smell, and sound. Despite trying medications, herbal teas, and numerous visits to the doctor, nothing helped ease her pain. In 2005, a new school year began. Michelle returned to university to continue her studies. To cover her tuition and rent, she worked at a fitness center. With limited funds, she rented a small apartment far from campus. At that time, Michelle was in a complicated long-distance relationship with a guy named Jason. Her best friend, Jessica, whom she met at university, lived on campus. They worked together, talked frequently, and often visited each other. Jessica's roommate was Oliver O'Quinn, a 27-year-old student from Georgia. Oliver was a great roommate and a friend to both Jessica and Michelle. The three have often spent time together. Michelle shared her relationship problems with Jason, and Jessica was always supportive. Oliver offered advice from a male perspective. Being a bit older and more experienced, they often valued his wisdom. Oliver, a nurse in the hospital's surgical department, began helping Michelle manage her debilitating migraines after learning about them. The hospital provided strong medications that greatly relieved her pain, allowing Michelle to finally enjoy life without those severe headaches. Surprisingly, Oliver had previously served in the Air Force and worked in Africa. Michelle dreamed of moving to Africa to help animals. She and Oliver could talk endlessly about it. Michelle decided to take a break from her long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Jason. During this time, she met Scott, a funny musician who played guitar in a band. Michelle felt very comfortable with Scott. However, in mid-October 2005, Jason returned and pleaded with Michelle to reconcile, and she agreed. She began making plans to spend Thanksgiving together. Meanwhile, Oliver was not impressed with any of Michelle's boyfriends, considering them frivolous and unreliable. The reason was that Oliver was in love with Michelle. Many acquaintances had suspected this for a while, noting the way he interacted with her and the way he looked at her. Oliver was constantly involved in her relationships and even accompanied her on dates, which seemed awkward, but Michelle didn't mind. She believed that they were just friends and didn't see anything wrong with that. At the end of October 2005, Michelle met with Jessica to share some exciting news. She and Jason had decided that she would move in with him, 500 kilometers away. Jessica was thrilled for Michelle, congratulated her, and asked about Oliver, but Michelle didn't respond. Michelle began getting ready for the move, balancing her busy schedule of studies, work, volunteer activities, and now packing and buying household essentials. Despite the hectic pace, she enjoyed these tasks. As a result, Michelle and Jessica saw each other less frequently, usually only catching up during their weekend volunteer work. They planned to have dinner together on November 9, 2005, looking forward to catching up and sharing stories. However, Michelle didn't show up for the meeting that evening, which was uncharacteristic of her. Jessica tried to call her friend, but she didn't answer. She assumed Michelle was upset about something and believed that was why she didn't show up. Jessica left several messages asking Michelle to explain what happened and why she was upset, but Michelle never responded. Jessica decided not to wait any longer and went home. When she got home, her phone was dead, so she charged it and went to bed. The next morning, on November 10th, Jessica discovered many voice messages on her phone. One was from the fitness center where both girls worked. The administrator asked about Michelle's absence, as she had not been at work for a couple of days. Their shifts didn't overlap, so they didn't see each other at work, leaving Jessica unaware of Michelle's absences. Understanding the significance of this project to Michelle, Jessica became anxious. She worried that something might have happened to Michelle. Jessica tried calling Michelle again, but there was no response. She then reached out to all her friends, but none of them knew where Michelle was. Concerned, Jessica got into her car and headed to Michelle's house to check on her. Meanwhile, after learning about her daughter's disappearance, Michelle's mother also drove to another city to find her. The drive took about an hour. When Jessica, who arrived first at Michelle's residence, got there, she saw police officers had sealed off the area as a crime scene. It was then that she received the heartbreaking news: Michelle had died. Nearby, she noticed a distressed Jason. Michelle's mother later arrived at the house and made the horrifying discovery that her daughter was dead. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment. All the doors and windows were closed, the lights were off, but the TV was on very loudly. Nothing had been stolen. Police found the body cold, indicating that Michelle had been dead for some time. She was lying face down with her left arm underneath her body. There were no wounds, bruises, or injuries that would indicate a violent death. It appeared that Michelle had fallen asleep and never woke up. Police believe that Michelle, 24, died of natural causes. Her body was sent for an autopsy and police conducted standard procedures, interviewed neighbors, and asked forensic experts to examine the scene. No fingerprints or DNA were found near the body, and neighbors did not hear or see anything suspicious. Police believe Michelle had used illegal drugs and died of an overdose. Police searched the apartment for drugs or paraphernalia but found nothing. There were only a few bottles of beer in the refrigerator. Next to Michelle's body on the bed was a half-empty beer bottle, which had only her fingerprints on it. As a precaution, the opened bottle was sent to a lab to be tested for any foreign substances or possible poisoning. Tests showed that nothing had been added to the beer. The medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of Michelle's death. She appeared to be completely healthy, with no illnesses other than migraines, which were unlikely to have been a significant factor. This led to many questions about how a young, healthy girl could fall asleep and not wake up. The position of her body was unusual for a natural death, raising further doubts. The expert concluded that Michelle died on the night of November 8th. The medical examiner is continuing a more thorough investigation to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, the police are looking into who she might have been in contact with around that time. Initially, questions emerged regarding Michelle's boyfriend, Jason, who was the first to arrive at her apartment and call the police. How did he end up there when he lived 500 kilometers away in a different city? Police brought Jason to the police station for questioning. Jason explained that he hadn't been able to contact Michelle for 2 days. Concerned, he drove over 5 hours overnight to check on her. Upon arriving on the morning of November 10th, he knocked on her door, but no one answered. He continued calling and knocking without success. Seeing Michelle's car in the parking lot, hearing her dog barking inside, and her phone ringing, he feared something was wrong. Looking through the window, he saw Michelle lying motionless on the bed. He then immediately called 911. The police arrived, broke down the door and found Michelle's body in the apartment. Jason appeared very sad and distressed. He had an alibi for the time of Michelle's death because he was in another city, so the police released him. The medical examiner provided new information after a careful examination of Michelle's body. A small needle wound was found on her left hand, located under her body. Police contacted her doctor to see if Michelle had undergone any tests or procedures the day before, but the doctor said no. The needle wound was in an unusual location, atypical for an injection. No illegal substances were found in her home and toxicology tests showed no illegal substances in her system. Police also observed that a trash bag may have been missing from Michelle's apartment. They speculate that someone injected something into Michelle, causing her death, and then threw the trash bag away to remove the evidence. Police searched the trash cans on the street near her home and found Michelle's trash because it had not been collected. They found checks and letters with her name on them, along with a syringe and a bottle of painkillers. This prescription drug is very dangerous and an overdose can be fatal. Toxicology testing for this drug had never been done before because it requires a special test. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy had never encountered this drug in her many years of practice. When the final test was done, it was found that Michelle's body contained a very high concentration of the drug, which caused her death without leaving any trace. This drug is not commonly used for general use. It is mainly used by anesthesiologists during surgery. The police interviewed Michelle's friend Jessica and learned about her complicated relationships with Jason, Scott, and Oliver. This information intrigued the police, as they suspected that one of these men might have harmed Michelle out of jealousy. However, who could it have been? Jason had already been ruled out as a suspect. According to a friend, Michelle's relationship with Scott was very brief and hadn't really developed. He understood when Michelle returned to her ex and stayed out of her life. Michelle was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to be with him, while she saw Oliver as just a friend, although he wanted more from her. Oliver soon became a suspect. In hindsight, Jessica realized there were many warning signs in Oliver's behavior. He followed Michelle everywhere, but it seemed sweet and innocent, so no one saw him as a threat. During a conversation with the police, Michelle's grief-stricken mother mentioned that the last time she spoke to her daughter was around 11 p.m. on November 7th. This made her the last person to speak with Michelle. Michelle's final words to her mother were that Oliver was supposed to come over to help her fill out some documents. The police found it strange that she invited a guy over late at night, especially when he had feelings for her and she didn't like him. There had to be a reason for this. It was revealed that Oliver worked in the hospital's surgical department and had access to a variety of drugs, including painkillers. He had previously helped Michelle with her migraines. Michelle's landlord, Peter, came to the police station to share a strange story about her. About a week before Michelle died, Peter needed to pick up some things from her apartment but couldn't get in touch with her. This was unusual for Michelle, who always paid her rent on time, kept the apartment clean, and didn't ignore him. Concerned, Peter went to the apartment and knocked on the door, but it took a long time for anyone to answer. Finally, a shirtless man with messy black hair and glasses opened the door. He looked outside for a moment and said that this wasn't a good time. Peter explained that he needed to get his things. However, the man slammed the door shut and told Peter to come back in a few hours. Peter was confused and did not understand the situation. After he left, Michelle called him back to apologize for the unpleasant situation. She explained that she had a severe migraine and her friend was treating her. Peter saw a picture of Oliver and recognized him as the man in Michelle's apartment. The police found a butterfly needle in Michelle's bag at her apartment. This type of needle is often used to inject drugs. Jessica confirmed that Oliver had given Michelle medication to relieve her migraine. Jessica also mentioned that Michelle was afraid of regular needles, so Oliver used a small butterfly syringe instead. Michelle could not inject the needle herself because she was too afraid to even look at it. If she injected the drug incorrectly, she would die immediately. So the drug was administered by someone with medical knowledge. This again pointed to Oliver's involvement. The police finally understood why Michelle had remained friends with Oliver and invited him to her home. He had provided her with a strong painkiller. Police did not find Oliver's fingerprints on the syringe or vial. He may have worn gloves and disposed of them elsewhere, leaving only Michelle's DNA. To charge him, the police would need to link the syringe to Oliver. The vials had a unique identification number, indicating they came from the department where Oliver worked. The drugs were stored in a special refrigerator that required a patient number and staff name to retrieve the drugs. This discovery confirmed that Oliver had taken the vials. Later, the police went to the hospital to talk to Oliver, but he did not show up for work. It was discovered that he had been fired on November 9th, shortly after Michelle's murder. Police suspected that he had been fired for using dangerous drugs, but hospital management denied this, saying that Oliver had been fired because his skills did not meet their standards. However, rumors circulated in the hospital that Oliver had been fired due to a shortage of medication. The police found out that Oliver was working at another clinic. They went to the clinic and spoke to a nurse who was surprised to see them. Oliver was then taken to the police station for questioning. He said that he had heard about Michelle's death from someone and expressed his condolences. The police were surprised and asked if they were close friends. Oliver replied that they were just acquaintances. The police then asked why he talked to her on the phone every day. Oliver did not answer. Instead, he said that he had to get back to work and left. At that time, the police did not have a warrant for his arrest. Oliver calmly arrived on campus and collected his things. The guy told Jessica at the end that he was going on vacation and left. It turned out that Oliver went to visit his ex-wife and daughter and then flew to his homeland in Ireland. There, he received a license and got a job at the hospital. After the police took the bottle of painkillers used on Michelle for analysis, the DNA test results came back. Confirmed that there was Oliver's DNA on the bottle cap, indicating that he had injected Michelle with a fatal dose of the drug. The police discovered that Oliver had left but was unable to act, despite having a warrant for his arrest. Extradition to the United States is often controversial for countries that oppose the death penalty. In this case, an Irish journalist alerted the police to Michelle's story. He proposed publishing an article detailing Michelle's death and highlighting Oliver's possible involvement, including his photograph and arrest warrant, to alert the public. The police approved and the article was published in April 2006. Upon reading the article, Oliver fled the country to Africa, where he had previously worked, fearing public backlash. He was eventually tracked down, arrested, and extradited to the US, where he was jailed. Oliver was charged with Michelle's murder but pleaded not guilty. His lawyers argued it was an accident, claiming that Michelle had requested Oliver to inject her with drugs for pain relief. That evening, Oliver miscalculated the dose, inadvertently giving her a lethal amount, leading to her death. The dose administered was 4 times the lethal amount, which was surprising since no one could believe an experienced nurse familiar with the drug would make such an error. Oliver did not apologize to the deceased's family for this mistake. The prosecutor had a different theory, suggesting that Oliver killed Michelle out of jealousy and revenge, as he did not want to share her with another man. It was alleged that he deliberately gave her the fatal dose with the intent to murder. During the trial, witnesses stated that Oliver was in love with Michelle and had been stalking her. Additionally, Oliver's cellmate testified that Oliver confessed to being deeply in love with Michelle, but she did not return his feelings. Oliver overheard a conversation between Michelle and Jason, where she professed her love for Jason and said Oliver meant nothing to her. Feeling humiliated by this, Oliver allegedly decided to take revenge by ending her life. Oliver had gained Michelle's trust through his medical care. However, he exploited this trust by injecting her with a quadruple lethal dose of medication. As a result, the jury convicted Oliver O'Quinn of first-degree murder, and he received a life sentence without the chance for parole. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Christy Giles. Christy and her friends attended a Halloween party at Soho House, West Hollywood, and had a fantastic time. After the party, however, Christy and her friend Hilda didn't go home. Christy Giles, born November 5, 1997, grew up in Mount Olive, Alabama. She is extremely beautiful and intelligent, attracting attention wherever she goes. Christy was the runner-up in the Miss Alabama beauty pageant. At the age of 14, she signed her first modeling contract, gaining financial independence from her parents. At the age of 18, she moved to Los Angeles, California after being recruited by a famous modeling agency. By the age of 24, she had become a successful model, appearing in fashion magazines and advertising for major brands, while also exploring acting. Christy is very close to her parents and sisters. In 2019, Christy met Jan and married him on August 31, 2020. They are a loving couple and her husband owns a candy store. On Friday, November 12, Christy, along with Christine Giles, Hilda Marcelo Sobrales Arzola, and another friend whose name is unknown, attended a Halloween party. Jan was away in San Francisco for the weekend and couldn't join them. After the party, Christy and Hilda did not return home. At around 5 p.m. on Saturday, Christy's body was found dead on the sidewalk outside a Culver City hospital where she had been left. 2 hours later, Hilda, 26, was found outside another hospital, still alive and in critical condition. Her family traveled from Mexico to be by her side, hoping she would recover. Sadly, there was no miracle. Hilda was declared brain dead 2 weeks later and taken off life support. Her organs were donated, allowing part of her to continue living. Hilda, who is from Mexico, graduated with honors and landed her dream job as an interior designer in Los Angeles. A third friend who attended the party with Christy left early and was not injured. Preliminary autopsy results indicate the girls died of an overdose of illegal substances. Toxicology reports found a mixture of drugs in their systems, but no signs of a physical struggle. It is unclear how the drugs entered their systems, as both girls said they lived healthy lifestyles. Initially, Los Angeles police believed the girls had voluntarily taken the drugs, leading to their overdoses. However, after interviewing a friend of Christy and Hilda, their views changed. The friend mentioned that the girls had met several men at the party, and that the men had invited them elsewhere. She described the group as 4 men in their 40s and 1 woman. 2 men act indecently, running around shirtless as if they are on drugs, while a third man, who appears sober, focuses on Hilda. A fourth man and a woman appear to be a couple. This group stands out at the party because of their age. Initially, the woman compliments Christie's friend, leading to an introduction to the men. Feeling uncomfortable, Christie's friend left the party with her brother an hour after the group arrived. Surveillance footage revealed 3 masked men dropping the women's bodies at separate hospitals before fleeing. Christie's husband, Jan, was deeply saddened by her death, as she had never used drugs, especially since her cousin had struggled with addiction and a close friend had died of an overdose. Jan suspected her drink had been spiked. At 12 o'clock, Jan tracked her phone to an apartment building at 8641 West Olympic Boulevard in Los Angeles, where the girls reportedly attended a party. Her phone was still there at 1:30 a.m. The police discovered that the building had only 7 apartments and identified which one hosted the party and who invited the girls. It was David Pierce's apartment. He claimed the girls took drugs voluntarily, but he has no information about what happened to them. Recently, it was reported that the police interviewed David's neighbors. They mentioned hearing strange sounds, like cries of pain, coming from his apartment on Saturday throughout the day. They also noticed that many people frequently visited his place, often making noise. Other bones from the first party also saw David with friends at the party, and they behaved strangely. After Jan shared Christie's story on social media, he received numerous messages from other girls who had similar experiences involving these men. They reported being taken from parties, drugged, and raped, though all the girls survived. Out of fear, they did not report it to the police. Christie's father was a military officer who served in Iraq and trained his daughters in self-defense. Christie's sisters were well prepared and could defend themselves even with a ballpoint pen. This makes it all the more puzzling for Christie's parents to understand what happened to her, as there were no signs of a struggle on her body. Hilda's family is also seeking justice for both Hilda and Christie. Hilda's parents are confident that their daughter did not willingly consume any illegal substances. They had taught her about the dangers of drugs. Hilda was an active person who loved sports and hiking. Her family believes that the girls were forcefully given drugs with the intent of assaulting them, but the perpetrators overdosed them by mistake. What angered the parents was that instead of taking Hilda and Christie to the hospital to save them, the men chose to abandon them. On December 16, 2021, the Los Angeles Police Department announced the arrest of 3 men connected to the deaths of Christie Giles and her friend Hilda. David Pierce, 37, was arrested for manslaughter and is being held on $1 million bail. Michael Ansbach, 47, and Brant Osborne, 42, were arrested for being accessories after the fact to manslaughter, with both held on $100,000 bail. These men were the last to see the women alive. A photo has surfaced showing Hilda with David and Michael at the party. Location data from Christie's phone showed that she and Hilda had gone to David's apartment in East Los Angeles after attending a party. They were reportedly out with 3 men in the early morning hours of November 13, according to David's neighbors. A Toyota Prius seen in surveillance footage matched the vehicle used when 3 masked men dropped Christie and Hilda off near the hospital. The men were known to frequent clubs and bars in Los Angeles, meeting women at parties, inviting them to their homes, allegedly using illegal drugs, raping them, and then releasing them. But for Christie and Hilda, it appears they miscalculated, leading to their overdoses. The police are currently gathering information from all the affected girls. Several girls have already come forward, claiming they ended up in David's apartment under similar circumstances. They believe that the men spiked their drinks without their consent, causing them to black out and lose memory of the events. Some girls also reported that the men harassed them, pretending to be film producers, and invited them to a casting. It has been revealed that Michael is a videographer, Brant is an actor with minor TV roles, and David is an actor and producer known. According to several co-stars on set, Brandt bragged about driving Christie's Hyundai the night they died. Actor Stephen Bauer, known for his role in the cult classic Scarface, has come forward to say he witnessed David assaulting a girl at a house party in Beverly Hills. The men were questioned by the police and admitted to taking the girls home from the party. However, they claimed the girls took drugs voluntarily and overdosed. Unsure of what to do, they decided not to call 911 to avoid trouble. Instead, they left Christie's body near a hospital after removing the car's license plate to avoid detection. They later left Hilda's body at the hospital, hoping she would regain consciousness. To date, the police have not received the CCTV footage as the investigation is still ongoing. A GoFundMe has raised more than $130,000 for the girls' funerals or investigation, and the amount continues to grow every day. On November 20, 2021, a memorial service was held for Christie in California. Friends laid flowers on the beach, carved hearts in the sand, and erected bushes and arches in her memory. Brandt, 42, and Michael, 47, were both arrested on suspicion of being accessory to manslaughter in connection with the deaths of Christie and Hilda, but have since been released from custody while the investigation continues.